record and then I'll start. Hello, everyone. We're absolutely delighted to have you all here today at our EU Academy Conference, the European Union and International Security Threats, Responses and International Conferences. This is, in fact, the third of our conferences for the EU Academy project. We're absolutely delighted to have you all here with us today. This is, in fact, the final conference also for this particular project. Not the final conference ever, but for this particular project, it'll be the final conference. So we're delighted to have you all there and to celebrate the success of the project and to kind of look at all the different things that we found out. And so we're really very delighted also with the funding by the European Commission, because this is co-funded by the European Union. So we thank the European Commission also for their co-financing. And just to give you a little background for those of you who maybe don't know the project so well, the project here is related to, of course, the European Union and the underlying issues of challenges that we've seen in the European Union for a number of years now, starting with initially populist movements in the EU, such as Brexit, but also other kind of movements that we've seen. We are seeing things also at the moment in France and the kind of instability that the government has there. We're seeing the kind of far-right insertion into various governments in the European Union. We're seeing a general detachment of citizens from both national and EU politics. So what we're trying to do, and what we've tried to do, is to develop a project where we're bringing out citizenship education and a better understanding of the European Union in order to promote an informed and critical debate about Europe, but an informed debate without resorting to populist messages that are often grounded in misinformation or alternative facts. Here, the project aims and has done so to promote active citizenship, to promote the common values of freedom, tolerance, and non-discrimination through education. We did a number of series of public events where we allowed various scholars from across Europe, but also across the world, really to participate with us and to discuss Europe and to discuss also security threats around the world and the impact that it has on Europe, and to share their research with one another and to engage in a broader debate also with decision makers and the general public. On our website, if you ever want to visit it, it's euacademy.net. You're able to also find some links to traditional academic publication channels like books, articles, working papers, as well as our previous events, webinars, workshop, and so on. It guides you through the various aspects of the research on the European Union, and it also provides you with the three really key objectives that the project had: to provide high-quality research-based and also comprehensive multidisciplinary teaching on the EU and EU integration as part of continuous development training, to provide a foundation by which academics and students are beneficially influenced by this series of innovative blended and distance learning formats on a range of multidisciplinary themes, and also to offer a series of outputs, of which this conference is one, by which we are motivating a cross-section of the population and of the academic community and civil society to be involved, to be informed. That's why we're also recording the conference, so that people are able to later watch it and be informed about the events that are happening in the European Union. And indeed, there's a lot of events happening. There is a variety of different events. I started already by saying initially, if you want a cycle started, when the Brexit referendum in the UK gave the result that the UK finally decided to leave the European Union, that was, of course, one of the very, very significant and important events in the European Union, but it was followed by many different and very significant events. We, of course, had the first term of the US presidency by Donald Trump. We had subsequently the COVID crisis. We had a number of different events that were related to that. We were seeing the development of new policy areas like health security in the European Union. That was the direct impact and direct outcome of the COVID-19 crisis, where Europe was starting to get more and more involved in this particular policy area. We've seen, of course, over the last couple of years, many different terrorist crises. We've seen a refugee crisis that was starting in 2015 and onwards, and in fact, to a certain extent, is continuing. We have seen, of course, instability in a variety of different national contexts. We've just seen the latest government in Germany that fell over budget differences and perhaps incompatibilities in the coalition government that it was, with fresh elections to occur in the spring in Germany. We've seen the latest crisis in France, where the previous French government, the Barnier government, was ejected from office by the French parliament, where it didn't hold a majority, where it was in fact reliant on a minority toleration by the French far right and Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen finally pulled the plug in a discussion and in a debate over the adoption of the French budget, which subsequently was not adopted. The French government fell after it asked for a vote of confidence in order to put the budget through Parliament, and it fell as a result of that because Marine Le Pen withdrew the support for the French government, the Barnier government, and now we are in a situation where we do not have a current government in France. We just have a caretaker government. We've seen that in a number of different contexts. We've seen in Italy, for instance, we have the participation of far-right populist movements in government. We've seen it in the Netherlands. We've seen it in Scandinavian contexts. We've seen the latest cancelled election in Romania, where the first round was won by a pro-Russian candidate that in the opinion polls, even on the same day as the election, was around 1 or 2% in the opinion polls, and then somehow jumped to 23%, which according to the Romanian presidency and the Romanian Constitutional Court was due to a massive manipulation campaign by Russia that catapulted them from 1 or 2% in the opinion polls to 22% in the first round. There would have been a second round to that presidential election where the pro-Russian candidate would have squared off with a pro-Western, pro-EU candidate. The whole election was cancelled and will happen in the spring because the Constitutional Court considered it invalid because of the level of manipulation that they argue has never seen before in a European context. They said that the level of manipulation reached levels that we have not yet seen in any election so far. So all of this to say is that we have a lot of things to discuss, really. I don't want to anticipate all of the discussions because I know we have a fantastic number of papers. And I thank you all for being here, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Professor Sarah Leonard, to guide us through the program.
Yes, so thank you very much, Christian, and a warm welcome from me as well. So it is indeed the third and final conference on this project, and we have a very interesting lineup of panels. We are looking at various aspects of European Union security cooperation, but also looking at the cooperation that the European Union has developed or not with other partners in the world. And we are also looking at the perceptions of third states of the European Union to avoid the focus on European perspectives only. And so we'll be looking at a wide range of security issues and also security responses. And we are very much looking forward to that. We will have a certain number of panels, and also later today, a keynote lecture with Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler from the Extremism Programme on terrorism financing, which I think will be extremely interesting. But so without further ado, I suggest that we move on to our first panel, which is entitled The European Union and Global Security Threats Towards Global Responses. And I see that a couple of the speakers have not connected yet, so we're going to get in touch with them. Might have been a slight issue in terms of translating the time of the program into their own time zone, because I think they are all in a different time zone. But I see that Dr. Carlos Ortiz is already with us, and Amparo Pamela Fabe is also there. So I suggest that we start the presentations, and we, in the meantime, will also be getting in touch with the other speakers. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Carlos Ortiz to this conference. He is a visiting researcher at the University of South Wales, and he will be presenting on global problems on our doorstep, transnational security threats bridging Latin America and Europe. And the second presentation will be given by Amparo Pamela Fabe, who is also a visiting researcher at the University of South Wales and also works at the National Police College in the Philippines, and she will be talking about the dangers of cognitive warfare in the South China Sea, the Philippine experience. So Carlos, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and you have the floor.
Right.
You have slides that you would like to share?
I do have some slides, but to be perfectly honest, just sometimes they take over a lot of time, and I think time is of essence here. And I think if there's opportunity for questions, I may show them. So I'm just going to be talking. Right. I mean, first of all, thank you very much. It's my first EU Academic conference, so therefore I am very grateful to be here. And I'm very grateful to Sarah and Christian for kind of inviting me. So, right, without any further preamble, I'm just going to start because, you know, just the sooner kind of like the finish, you know, everybody has the floor, and we can cover as much as possible. So, right, I mean, recently, very recently, the UK Prime Minister gave a major kind of foreign affairs speech. I should mention, just thinking about what just Christian said, the UK Prime Minister is very much pro-European, like many of us, so which is good. So, and you know, after visiting many capitals in Europe, he said in the major speech, you know, global problems have become local, and geopolitics is at our doorsteps. It is very much in this spirit that I put together this presentation, because I truly believe this. So the presentation is very dense, but I'm going to try to cover as much as possible, and hopefully I'm going to trigger some of your interest so we can continue the conversation elsewhere. The conversation really kind of like addresses or outlines like my three main research strands, which touch very much on the problems like the issues like the UK Prime Minister raised. That basically the kind of global problems are at our doorsteps. So the first part of my presentation covers my first research strand, which is a conflict model. The second one kind of focuses specifically in Latin America, because like, you know, I have noted, you know, when we address problems at the level of the European Union, in a way, you know, Christian was addressing that, we touch very much on Russia and some of the concerns that feel very local here in Europe. However, some problems originate in the global south. And what I have, for example, in particular in mind here, is like violence linked to drug trafficking. And many of that comes from Latin America. So that's one of the reasons it's very important to understand what is happening in those parts of the global south, as some of the problems that are becoming local here, you know, might originate elsewhere, and we need to understand about that. The third strand of of my research, I think I will just possibly at the end I will mention it in passing, but this one relates to kind of like the need to kind of in the reinvention of like the policing profession here in Europe. We need to start incorporating kind of ideas and concepts of international relations into the policing curriculum. But I will begin kind of speaking with more detail about my strands of research, and then I'll go as far as I can. I am timing myself just to make sure I don't go beyond the allocated time. So now the first strand of my research, which relates to a kind of a perspective of conflict in the 21st century. I mean, security, as we commonly understand it, traditionally has been understood is like a security is a public or a collective good. But what I have seen, and this is a continuation of my doctoral research and my book, Private Armed Forces and Global Security, is that security as a collective good is increasingly being challenged. The way security is constructed normally, is accepted now, because there used to be some resistance, is like a security satisfied with the assistant or like a private suppliers. And what I have here in mind in particular is like a security and defense contractors, and what is commonly termed in the literature as like private military security companies. So they contribute with the state to satisfy security, and I call that security partnerships. I have many publications about it. I can share them with anyone who is interested. So now, what is happening now is like the security has become incredibly networked and transactional. But networked is meaning that many other parties participate to the satisfaction of security other than just the state. But conversely, and counteracted that model, in my book, Private Armed Forces and Global Security, I established that there's a dichotomy in the private realm now whereby you find legitimate and illegitimate private military suppliers. So what's happening in terms of the legitimate private military suppliers, which for analytical purposes, I call them adverse private forces, we are dealing here with entities just like drug cartels or drug trafficking organizations, organized crime, mafias, terrorist groups, and possibly some kind of like insurgents or rebels. So now what that happened, they are acting kind of in cooperation, and that model of like adverse cooperation is challenging the state model. So what it happens there is like a security public good is constantly under tension. So the ultimate example of that is when we have an ISIS caliphate covering kind of a large portion of Syria and Iraq, and it became a proto state. They have their own security kind of measures. They extracted money from the people. They extracted a lot of money from oil, but they challenged and displaced what the traditional security provision was kind of like the Iraqi army, who just literally disbanded overnight. So now, but this is the most important thing. In a smaller scale, when you look at corners of Europe, and this happens all over the world, I mean, you have in mind things like problems you see in Europe, like gang violence in Sweden. Antwerp has become the drug capital of Europe. And for example, in the UK, like stabbings and shootings linked to drug violence before the pandemic, they were rare, and now they are becoming commonplace. So that is the challenging of that model. So now, and linked to that is my second strand of research, which is like the research focusing in Latin America. This is currently my most important strand of research because it's leading to a major, a major publication, which I'm lucky to be co-authoring with Christian Cunert. What happens here is like, to understand the problems in Europe, many problems originate in the global south, and some problems come from Latin America. So we need to focus in Latin America. I must confess about I feel a little bit guilty of contributing to Eurocentrism sometimes when we think about security, because despite my Latin American background, I have been publishing and researching about largely what happens in Africa and the Middle East, with little focus on Latin America until recently, until I thought, oh, hang on a second, I have the Latin American background, and I've been just focusing on where the discipline takes you, which here in Europe, it takes you to Africa, the Middle East, and some other areas, but we tend to ignore Latin America. So now Latin America is a vastly, profoundly under-researched area in international relations and international security. It has been historically neglected. If anyone has interest in asking, I've been, through their research I've been doing with Christian, there are some historical reasons for that, amongst other areas. So what we thought about, like, and here, John, the easiest example to grasp is like a violence linked to drug trafficking. And many of the drug trafficking has its origins in Latin America, but is now in Europe. It's not only in our doorstep, it's inside the house, within our borders. And we need to understand what happens in Latin America. So what we are doing is, like with Christian, is that we need to understand what is happening in security in Latin America, because if we understand that, we know how it affects us inside Europe. So we are using, our framework is partly guided by securitization theory, which is a very European kind of theory, by the Copenhagen School, because securitization is the favorite strategy the Latin American governments use to deal with security problems. In layman terms, there might be some people here who are not familiar with securitization theory, but like if you want the basic premise is like if there's a security threat and a securitization actor decides that this is like an existential threat to the state, then through a rhetorical act, they can argue that this kind of like threat needs to be dealt with extraordinary measures. Just to make it extraordinary measures, it has to be presented as something really kind of threatening the state, and an audience, which is here in Europe, is normally the general public, accept, yes, we agree with that, and then it's taken out of the political realm and usually militarized. So, one example it might be easier to people to grasp if like migration at the moment is becoming a hot topic all over the world. Not just here in Europe or in the US, but also kind of in South America, because massive migration from Venezuela and Haiti, which are two kind of countries in trouble. So what happens is like when you take it out of the political realm, is like you enact extraordinary measures. So if Donald Trump decides that it's an existential threat to the United States integrity, at some point he might fully militarize the borders. That is an extraordinary measure. And militarization and dealing with things through hard ways is what Latin American governments do. But the theory is not very, the theory was kind of designed, securitization, with the idea of like a kind of the well-established democracies in Europe as a response. But when you try to apply it to the global South, it's not that easy. So what Christian and myself we are doing, we are developing a framework specifically tailored to Latin America to understand what is happening. Without getting into more details, we have developed, for example, an innovation that to understand securitization in Latin America, you need to focus on what we call the milieu of felicity conditions. And in more conventional terms, what it means is you need to look at the historical and social context of the region and how the people who enact securitization, which is normally the head of a government, interpret that context and sell it to the public. Like we are going to securitize because this is threatening, like the way the country has been formed based on history, discourses of exploitation, and a number of other factors. Another thing that we need to focus on is the network of securitization actors, because, for example, a key in Latin America, you need to think that the US exerts a great deal of influence in whatever happens in Latin America, and you need to take that into consideration. Also, we are starting to understand that drug trafficking organizations, they do affect democratic process and kind of like a tilt where governments are moving. And the third area is political rituals, which relates to the sort of like a rituals and norms that a leader needs to follow in order to enact securitization, with particular focus in Latin America. Just a recent example that you see that something for you to grasp what that means, what happened in South Korea recently. So to follow rituals, some of the members of the kind of the Congress or the parliament they had to jump the fence to go inside the precinct and vote. You know, the vote had to take place there. So that is, for example, a political ritual, and Latin America has its own political rituals. So we are trying to understand that, to see what happens in Latin America, so to understand how it affects us. So the last point, you know, I'm willing to ask more questions because it's a vast piece of research. The last point, and I'm just going to mention it in passing, not to go over my time, is like some of this knowledge, not everything, they need to be embedded in the policing curriculum, because now the problems have an international element, and police officers, the profession, needs to incorporate some elements of this international knowledge into the traditional curriculum. I think it needs to happen in Europe now for police forces to fully grasp the understanding of what is happening here and how they interact with members of the public. And that is a completely different kind of like a research strand that complements the three together. And if anyone has any more specific questions about any of these three strands, I'm willing to answer any question here or outside the conference. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and that was extremely interesting. And for once, indeed, we had a perspective from Latin America, which is quite rare. And now I will give the floor to Mimi, our next speaker, and we will then, I see that we have one of our other speakers, Dr. Khalifa Diop, has also joined the conference, so we will come to you afterwards if that's okay. And so we will now hear the presentation by Amparo Pamela Fabe. So Mimi, you have the floor as well. And I will allow you to share your slides as well. So just...
Pleasant good afternoon to all. Thank you to Professor Christian Kaunert for inviting me to the EU Academic Conference. I was the consultant of the Enhancing in and Security with funded by the German government on terrorism financing, covering Indonesia and the larger ASEAN region. So my lecture on the dangers of cognitive warfare in the South China Sea, the Philippine experience, is born out of my teaching experience with the Philippine Coast Guard Command Training Center, as well as the Philippine National Police Maritime Group. I also did several research with the U.S. Department of Defense on cognitive warfare. I begin my presentation. So Chinese aggression in the South China Sea. Manila's National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea reported that 2 of its Coast Guard vessels were damaged in collisions with Chinese vessels that were conducting unlawful and aggressive actions near the Sabina Shoal. So when we talk about coercive actions, we are focusing on several actions carried out by China from 2020 to 2024 that included laser pointing of military-grade lasers, the implementation of dangerous maneuvers such as the blocking and ramming of maritime law enforcement vessels, the firing of water cannons against Philippine Coast Guard vessels, the creation of artificial islands, the deployments of maritime militia vessels, interference with fishing and resource extraction activities inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. So all of these coercive actions carried out by the China Coast Guard and the Chinese maritime militia is carried out within the Philippine exclusive economic zone. So Asian powers are becoming factors in the European security area. This emphasizes the inherently interconnected nature of the strategic landscape with security in the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific being linked. As the US-China strategic competition sharpens, the Indo-Pacific regional security architecture is in flux. the relationship now focuses more on competition rather than cooperation. So for this lecture, the cognitive warfare falls under the maritime security threats, consisting of cyber attacks, cognitive warfare, sabotage, and disinformation. Since communities and nations are interconnected, perceptions and narratives are the linchpin of relations. Therefore, negative and misleading perceptions are used to amplify the Chinese position. So cognitive warfare degrades the capacity to know and produce knowledge. Cognitive sciences cover all the sciences that focus on knowledge and its processes, namely psychology, linguistics, neurobiology, and logic. Cognitive warfare, therefore, is the way of using knowledge for a conflict purpose. Cognitive warfare aims to create cognitive emotional conflict by influencing a target population's thoughts and values using technical means and information. As a target, the human capital is a weak point in a nation's defense, particularly for nations like the Philippines that are highly connected and based on open systems. Advertisers and media outlets recognize the brain's vulnerabilities and aggressively stimulate instinctual impulses to attract consumers and sell products. China leverages these same impulse pathways to shape the values and opinions of an external populace to confuse, polarize, and undermine a nation's governmental operations and planning processes. So the objectives of these malign influence operations is directed to sow confusion and discord with the aim to divide the communities and weaken the resolve of Filipino citizens in upholding their territorial integrity through the use of armed force. In May 2021, the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs filed the 100th diplomatic protest against the deployment, prolonged presence, and illegal activities of Chinese vessels inside its exclusive economic zone. So I would just like to highlight 5 examples of the Philippine experience of cognitive warfare. The first example is that Chinese ships ordered Filipino fisherfolk who entered Scarborough Shoal, located inside the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone, that they have entered Chinese waters. They were harassed, bullied, and prevented from fishing inside the lagoon by personnel of Chinese Coast Guard vessels. As a result of this regular harassment, the fishermen are now accompanied by 2 Philippine Coast Guard vessels every time they go and fish in the traditional fishing grounds. The second example of the Chinese aggression in this area is that the Chinese ships attacked resupply missions of a Philippine warship inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The China Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia vessels had harassed, blocked, and directed water cannons against a Philippine vessel on a resupply mission to Philippine military personnel on board the BRP Sierra Madre, a ship grounded at the Second Thomas Shoal. The third example is when the Chinese embassy claimed that Western Command Chief Vice Admiral Alberto Carlos agreed on a new model in the South China Sea during a January 2024 phone call with Colonel Li Jianzhong, China's defense attaché. China threatened to leak the call, which it claimed was proof that the Philippines agreed to its terms in order to bring down tensions in the Second Thomas Shoal. Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo asserted that there has never been a cabinet-level agreement with China on the Second Thomas Shoal or any of the disputed areas in the South China Sea. The fourth example, a Philippine media team had been aggressively chased by Chinese ships armed with heavy weapons in the South China Sea last April 8, 2023. Chiara Zambrano, a local broadcaster, and her news team were en route to the Second Thomas Shoal when Chinese ships chased them out of the area. The TV crew was in the area to document the attempts of Filipino fishermen to carry out their livelihood in traditional fishing grounds. The fifth example, a Philippine Coast Guard plane carrying Filipino journalists flew over the Spratly Islands, located within the country's exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. Suddenly, a Chinese voice issued a stern command over the radio, "Leave immediately." This order came from a radio operator on a Chinese Coast Guard vessel below. So all of these are examples of cognitive warfare that are being done by the China Coast Guard vessels in the South China Sea. So in the face of persistent Chinese coercive actions, the Philippines initiated arbitration under Annex 7 of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, disputing China's claims to much of the South China Sea maritime area as incompatible. Briefly, the 2016 arbitral ruling in favor of the Philippines set forth these points. First, China's claims to historic rights and resources have no legal basis. Second, none of China's claimed land features in the Spratly Islands are an island capable of generating a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. The third point, China violated the Philippines' sovereign rights by interfering with oil exploration activities, prohibiting Philippine fishing vessels from operating in traditional fishing grounds, and conducting land reclamation in areas where the Philippines enjoys sovereign rights. The fourth point is that China violated its marine environmental protection obligations under the UNCLOS by causing severe harm to the coral reef environment with its land reclamation activities and the harvesting of endangered species. So as a conclusion, given the shared security concerns in the South China Sea, the Philippines seeks to forge cooperation with like-minded partner nations within ASEAN and extra-regional partners such as the European Union to deal with evolving threat perceptions and manipulative narratives that continually fill up the cognitive space. Moreover, one of our allies, Australia, also is helping through the La Trobe Security Brief, is helping us in the cognitive warfare to come up with counter narratives against the Chinese position. Close and substantial engagements with defense allies such as the European Union and the US are indispensable so that the Philippines can effectively and successfully respond to the spread of selective disinformation of China who pursue their malign interests. So thank you very much. And with this, I end my presentation. I turn back the floor to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mimi. That was extremely interesting. Thank you for your insights. And I now would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Dr. Khalifa Diop. I believe that he is on the call as well. Yes. Hello, good morning to you. So Dr. Khalifa Diop is going to present the Citizen Barometer of Security, a tool for a better management of human security in West Africa and the Sahel region. And Dr. Diop is based at the Université Numérique Sheikh Hamidou Khan, and he has been working on the Citizen Barometer of Security with a team of other researchers, and notably Dr. Rachid Id Yassin at the Université Gaston Berger. But I believe this morning Dr. Id Yassin wasn't able to join us, but we have Dr. Khalifa Diop with us. So a warm welcome to you. And I have made you a guest, so you're able to share your screen. Perhaps you could have it in a presentation mode, so we would see your slides a little bit bigger. Yes, that's perfect. You have the floor. You're still muted right now.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, all. Just apologize if my English sucks because I'm a French speaker. So I just will try to explain myself in English. So if I have any difficulty, Sarah is here to give a help. So I will talk about with you about we talk about citizen barometer of security, a research we are conducting since 2020 or before in Sahel and West African regions. This research aims to collect population views about human security. So we have made a tool and an online map to visualize all these results. With Rashid Idiasin, who is not here today, we visited 5 or 6 countries in West Africa and Sahel to collect data. So I will talk about the principle of and definition of the CBS, the Citizen Barometer of Security, and then the objectives and the uses of the CBS. After, we will talk about the CBS indicators and the methodologies, like dimensions, the indexes, and the choice of locations. We will talk about also some results about the CBS, and at the last resort, we will talk about the issues and the challenge of the CBS. So, what is the CBS? The CBS is a dimensionally and to what are the principles and definitions of the CBS? Oh, the program aims first of all to talk about human security and citizenship. So it's multidimensionality. We take in account the physical security, the economical security, the health security, the environmental security, personal, collective, and political securities. This program aims also to give tools to our deciders to prevent by anticipating and neutralizing and avoiding risk of securities. We also promote plurality, like co-production of security, but because we all are citizens. So we also promote inclusion, integrating and involving populations in public security action. What is the CBS? The CBS is a tool, as I said. Actually, we visited 6 countries like Senegal, Gambia, Bissau Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. About 13 localities and 39 neighborhoods were surveyed. We talked with about 3,000 respondents. We actually have a 3 national report about Senegambia, a national report about Niger, a national report about Mali, and a national report about Burkina Faso. So the CBS is built like this. We talk about, excuse me, showing my comments. Okay. So we have 4 dimensions of or more of securities. We aim to understand the perceived security, and the live security. The difference between the perceived security and the live security is the live security refers to a person's concrete and tangible experience of security, like absence of crime, stable employment, easy access to healthcare, public securities, etc., etc. On the other hand, the perceived security refers to a person's subjective perceptions of his own safety and that of their environment, like influenced by media, individual experience, and social interactions. So, for example, a person may feel safe in a neighborhood that was in a low crime rate, even if that neighborhood is actually more dangerous than another neighborhood with a higher police presence. So we also try to address climate security and the OMP, les organisations de maintien de la paix, the peacekeeper organizations like Barkhane, like Takuba, like the other organizations that intervene in West African and Sahel regions. So governments and organizations must consider both live and perceived safety when developing policies and programs to improve the safety of individuals and communities. This requires a holistic approach that takes into account both the objective realities of security and the subjective realities of security, like perception of populations. So these dimensions are coupled with a security citizen index, which is composed by the theoretical index and the territorial index. I will explain those two indexes. Leads to map creations, statistic providings, and reports. So we aim to develop a knowledge tool, first of all, about human security in West Africa and Sahel. We also want to disseminate standards and promote good practice of decision-making about citizen securities. We also aim to provide scientific and legal and technical expertise and strengthen the capacities of populations, civil society, organization, and public institutions. The last thing is we want to participate in prevention and resolution of security problems. So the methodology, I talked about dimensions. We have 5 dimensions of security that we are dealing with. The security environment, the environment of security, excuse me, the victimization and care, the exposure to violence, the confidence and appreciation of the public security actions, and the citizen action. Each of those dimensions have variables like main difficulties that people are living in their neighborhood, the social cohesion, the quality of life, the main danger, and the feeling of security of the insecurity. We also address the aggression, the theft, and breakings, the hostage taking, the kidnapping, torture, injury management, and complaint. In the exposure dimension, we address drug and firearm trafficking, prostitution, and procuring and trafficking of individuals for the purpose of sexual exploitation, the risk also of abduction or forced displacements, the religious violent extremism, and the risk of terrorist attack. In the confidence of the appreciation of the PSA dimension, we address the circulation, the control, and the surveillance by the SDS, the combating sex trafficking and prostitutions, combating also drug and firearm trafficking, the APS, the public action security of the police, the gendarmerie, and the army, and the trust in the police, how population trusts in the police, in the gendarmerie, in the army, and the judiciary system. And about citizen action, we address the action of local, national, and international NGOs, the action of religious authorities, and the role of citizen action. Each dimensions are coupled of circumstantial dimensions, if I am able to talk like this, because we know that climate security is a pregnant question in Sahel. So we have a section specifically who belongs specifically at this climate security. We address in this section to the perceptions of drought, like rain, flooding, and other climate shocks, the economic impacts of climate shocks, the climate migration, and the state action in the fight against climate change. In peacekeeping organization, we address the perception of the role of PKOs by populations, the confidence in African and non-African security governance, the perceptions of the role of international agencies in conflict resolution in Sahel, securities and in the security and religion section, we address the role of religious actors in security or insecurity, the perception of armed groups, and the religious trends and secularism. So I will, well, you are not required to understand all this, the methodology, the applied, so we can go through this, the dimension applied, and I will give you the presentation after. So these are the coefficients we made on each variable and each dimensions and each modality to address security, to classify the degree of security of each locality. So this index is coupled with a territorial index. That's what I was talking about. So each locality has a security weight. So a capital is different from a standard town. A prefecture is different than an economical one. So they don't have a same security height, a same security weight. Excuse me. So we classified the political level of each locality as capital, head of department, prefecture, economical and standard dimensions. So we affected a coefficient to each locality to have an idea about the security weight. Though we use the dimension, the economic, the density of population, the number of police services, the number of the quality of life, but all this information are gathered by asking experts in domains. So it was not addressed about by surveying, but it's a qualitative research that help us to classify localities before surveying that. So this leads to what we call a synthetic safety factor, which is composed by theoretical coefficients and the territorial coefficients. So I explained all these two coefficients. After we choose localities that we classified, we aim to survey urban and rural areas. Each time we search to survey, like here, Dakar, Saint-Louis, that are two main towns of Senegal, and on the other hand, Tambacounda and Ziguinchor, that are two most of the time rural areas. That's what we done in Gambia with Buyam and Banjul Serekunda, in Bissau and Farim, in Guinea-Bissau. So we did the same approach in Niger by surveying Niamey, Karma, and Kolo. So the districts in the same locality, we also try to balance between most secure neighborhoods and poor secure neighborhoods. The example of Banjul, we have chosen Banjul, Bundung, and Manjaikunda. Very safe, quite safe and not safe to survey and to try to balance the results. Though the choice of the neighborhoods is based on the presence of SDS, security and defense services, the essential services like banks, public administration, etc. For a concern of balance and territorial relevance, as you understand. So I'm going to show you quickly some results of the CBS. That's what we can have by creating data collected by locality. So for each country, we can have the most secure localities and the most critical and secure localities. In Senegal, like in Gambia, and we can classify also the countries by this index. So we have an index from 10 to 8 to from -8 to -10. So we have the classification here of these neighborhoods. Sare Gilel, for example, is a poor is in the urgent security in a situation of insecurity, while, for example, Dakar is in a good security, and so on and so on. So we can also show with the CBS this kind of results, like the appreciation of the security by locality. How population appreciate the healthcare situation or the FDS work, the police securitizations in Senegal. We have most of the time the population of Saint-Louis and Dakar will appreciate well this action, and on the other hand, in Tambacounda, in Ziguinchor, they appreciate this not very well. In Gambia also we have this is in Guinea-Bissau, the exposure of drug trafficking by neighborhood. We can see here Sintra is different from Militaire, which is different from Pracha, and we can classify all neighborhoods about one question. Like here, it's about the exposure of drug trafficking. We can also have this information about like the security environment. The climate security. We can have it of the appreciation of international security organization, etc. Here we have the perception of the security environment in all the countries. We didn't update about to include Burkina Faso because we are also in finalizing the report, but we can have an idea about the 5 first countries in Sahel and Senegambia. So we can have this kind of results also about the theft. We can have also the classification of localities by the rate of theft, etc. So these are also the results, some results of people perceptions. It's not important. I think that's the result of the report you can find on our site, Citizen Security. So the last thing is you can visit our site, and we have this tool. This tool is a central tool of the CBS. We have an online map that gather all information we collected in the field and classified by dimension of security. So we can have we can have the index of each country and classify each country. So we can I will end my exposition here. be careful, because this data concerns also the locality surveyed, like Dakar in Senegal, Saint-Louis, Tambacounda, Bissau, Bamako, and Kolo Karma in Niger. So that does not reflect the reality of all the country. What we want to show here is the potential of this tool. If we come to the results, if we come to survey all regions of all countries, we could have a result reflecting the reality, the reality, the actual reality of the country. But at the state of the research, it's not the case. We just want to show you the potential of this tool, and you can choose in the map the locality and the neighborhood, but the results by country are just indicative. So we have some challenges to meet. So the challenge of co-production, the social responsibility of public research, and the challenge of sustainability. Because the political will of the challenge of sustainability, like political will of institutions and independence. We will continue and collect and implement that data to cover all international territories if we can, if we have the means, if we have also the sufficient a team, a strong team to do that. We aim to institutionalize, the citizen security barometer through a citizen security observatory that could interest academics with the production of reliable and objective data, with the cooperation, of course, of the CSOs and the SDS and the authorities. We aim also to extend the system to other ECOWAS and African Union countries. So that was, I was a little bit long, I think. So excuse me also for the bad English. I don't know if I made myself understood, but I tried to do my best. So you can have the presentation, and you can also visit our site to understand more, to know more about the citizen barometer of security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalifa, and really no apology needed. You did extremely well, and we understood you without any problem. So don't you worry about it. And thank you so much for translating, as you are obviously used to working in a different language. So it was extremely interesting and detailed, and we will certainly have a look to find out more about this really interesting project. And I'm now handing over to Christian, who will introduce our next speaker.
Right. Let me see. Is our next speaker here? Mansour, are you here? I think I can see you in the list. If you could maybe switch your camera on.
Can you hear us, Mansour? We see your name in the guest list. No, it seems that maybe there's a problem with the connection.
Maybe take a couple of questions. I'll try and see now.
All right, so apologies. We've had some speakers having issues connecting this morning. So are there any questions for Carlos, for Mimi, or for in relation to the previous presentation, so for Khalifa? So whilst people are thinking about the question, I shall abuse my power as a chair. I have a question for you, Carlos. I was wondering the extent to which you think that the kind of lessons we can draw from tackling security threats in Latin America, to what extent do you think that we can draw lessons that are relevant to Europe, or do you think that there are some major differences in terms of the political and security context?
Right. Yes, just let me check. Oh, yes, I have unmuted myself. Sorry. Well, you know what comes to my mind when I have conversations related to how much, you know, on the one hand, I have to say, we are still here in Europe living with this perception. I mean, sadly, I will include myself until recently, that whatever happens in Latin America is completely irrelevant to what happens here. There's still that perception. But looking at things from a more practical level that anyone can understand, and here I'm going to be talking about organized crime, in particular drug trafficking. I won't be talking about terrorism. Is that the school of crime now is international. And if you went back about 10 years ago to learn about crime in the online school of crime, you have to go into the dark net, and it was very sophisticated. You don't need that. Everything is readily available to you on the conventional internet. You can go into Telegram and I just connect to any sort of people you want to do whatever you want. So I've been observing for the last 20 years that some of the things that happen in terms of the evolution of organized crime in Latin America, sooner or later, they arrive here in Europe. But you don't see, in Europe, we don't see that connect. Just to give you an example about related to drug trafficking violence, which is becoming more commonplace in Europe, the shooting and stabbing between gangs. About 20 years ago, it was unthinkable to happen here in Europe. You know, Europe is the safe location. It will never happen. So it began in places in South America. 20 years ago, it was not that common in South America. It's not common. And now what happened before the pandemic, someone, I'm going to use the example of the UK, someone getting stabbed or killed in relation to drug violence was frontline news. It was the one item on the main channels in the UK. Now it's more common because it's happened on a regular basis. So, but we haven't been observing in Latin America how that situation happened and evolved in Latin America to become commonplace here. And I think into looking to those more practical examples, we have more to learn. I can tell you one thing that is now becoming more commonplace, and not just here in you have heard Antwerp is now the capital, the drug capital in Europe. That's the main point of entry for drugs because of the port. So as drug violence start taking hold of areas, now there's shootings here in the UK. And soon you're going to have what I call, I'm terribly sorry for use crude terms, the moped killings. There are people in little mopeds going like getting paid a very small amount of money, and are just getting paid just to go and kill people. But if we start looking about what causes that in Latin America, and Mimi might be familiar because it's that happening there. It's international. You learn online how to do it. If we learn online what causes that, which in Latin America has a lot to do with deprivation and poverty, that will arrive here and will happen here. The sooner we learn how that originated in the global south or far away from Europe, it's going to be easier for us to tackle those problems here. I know it's a very practical example, but it gives you a sense of urgency as we need to pay more attention to what is happening in Latin America, just to modify our policies, just to address problems like that.
That was extremely interesting. So thank you for joining us this morning. And I now would like to give the floor to Dr. Ismail Swadi Weke, who is also a visiting researcher at the University of South Wales. So good morning. Well, I'm saying good morning, but I think for you it might be good afternoon or almost good evening. So you have the floor, Ismail.
Thank you, Prof. Leonard. Allow me and my colleague to join this wonderful conference in this evening. It is still morning over there in London. Thank you to Institute Agama Islam Presiden dan Rapang that could join us for this wonderful conference. Allow me to share my presentations entitled A Global Threat, Joint Response between European Union and Southeast Asia, Strengthen Security Ties. Since Southeast Asia, even though that it is far away from European continent, and then we still need at least likewise 15 hours to have a direct flight from Amsterdam or from London to the capital of Southeast Asia in Jakarta, but somehow it is still there is a connectivity and strategic position between these two areas. And then actually this presentation is such kind as the early or preliminary thing about this topic, and then hopefully in 2025 we could join on the phase meeting, since going to London or to the European country, for us here in Indonesia, we need to apply visa, and the post-pandemic situation need 4 to 5 months before to apply for the visa. And then somehow we face the same or the global threat right now, not only in one country, but trans geographical boundaries from one to another one. Since the terrorism is the issue of everyone, likewise we have a marathon in Boston. Somehow there is another case in Jakarta, in Bali. A bomb not only make us problem with the economic, and the same time make us fear. So this is why we need a friend to somehow to treat this one, and combating this one. We have counter terrorism to avoid not only before that it is a kind of economic, but somehow can arise fear between us. And then the partnership between European Union, and not only one country, but as the entity of EU, and then somehow Southeast Asian nation come to a friendship, and strengthening the partnership, and make the program of counter-terrorism it run. And then before, actually between Europe and Southeast Asia has the very good connectivity, since we have Malacca here, and then it already has the home of connectivity between European and Southeast Asia. And then we have now another place like in between Asia countries, make it better, and make it the communication came itself. And then actually, the terrorism itself not come from one country, but as the somehow to say it, the seed is come from the small community, but they do it in the other nation. Like one case in Indonesia, they train themselves in Johor Bahru in Malaysia, and they make it in Bali in Indonesia. This is the issue actually not only the issue of Indonesia or issue of Malaysia, but this is the issue of Southeast Asia. So it involves the intelligence capacity, in the same times the enforcement of cooperation or somehow border security, and then try the best cooperation in between the nation to evolve from time to time, because after one case to another case, not only some how in Jakarta, but there is it was twice, and one small Makassar, because it is only evolve one franchise, how to say, a small restaurant in Makassar without any person burden, but still that was practice of terrorism. And then there is another one challenge here and limitation in Indonesia, because since the archipelago, so it is not easy to control and to maintain, even though that from one island to another island, they have the same policy, but the capacity of officer is not the same. So this is will the problem. And in the big area of European Union and Southeast Asia, is somehow it is another intercultural situation, and then geopolitical interest. So it could be the way to build or to strengthen our cooperation through the dialogue. So we can learn from UK, we can learn from European country how they could have a program to counter terrorism. In the same times, we will need a capacity building program. And then the conclusion is about Southeast Asia and European Union, that actually we have faced the same problem and recognize the need and opportunity to work together, collaborative work to enhance not only about the situation itself, but how to foster a closer cooperation. And then the European Union has the intelligence. At the same time, European Southeast Asia country has the same one, but we need to share this kind of information, and then somehow to establish the law enforcement, and then capability of the officer to do the law information. And then two regions actually already address the same things in between this case to another case, and then involve to involved in many high-level meeting, and then somehow in the officer meeting, this is for sustainability and comprehensive approach to the counter-terrorism, not only to one case or one case to another, but the problem is actually another one to embrace the global solidarity. I would like to end my presentation to say that actually we have very good help, and we already find the partner when the European country could come up to see and then give help during the the problem of terrorism rise up in Indonesia. And at the same time, actually, this is time for us to extend and to enlarge our cooperation, not only between government to government, but at the same time, we need from university to university and people to people. I would like to thank to the organizing committee and the scientific committee of the conference allow me to present this paper among us, and then it's a good one to have and accept any of comment or questions from the floor. Thank you, Prof. Leonard. I offer the stage.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ismail. It seems there's the slight delay in the connection. So thank you so much for your presentation. And this concludes all the presentations this morning. So are there any questions for our speakers? So you can unmute yourself to ask your question, or you can type it in the chat box, whichever way you prefer. So I shall abuse my power as a chair again. So I have a question for Mimi. So I was wondering, what would you be then your recommendations to deal with that situation? So what would be your advice or recommendations to the Coast Guards?
Okay, for now, the Philippine Coast Guard is undergoing training under the U.S. Department of Defense on cognitive warfare. And then in my engagement with the European Union as the consultant for enhancing security in and with Asia, I started with terrorism financing, and I think in the future there can be room for also handling disinformation and cognitive warfare also with China. And it's only the Philippines that is focusing on this area, but I think Malaysia and Indonesia as well might have some concerns in the future. So this is an area of cooperation, and for 2025, the Dutch Foreign Ministry will have a project on security for Indonesia and project as a result. So I hope in the future, misinformation projects can also be funded by the European Union for the whole ASEAN region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for Dr. Ismail, as you are looking at European cooperation from the outside, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on, what could be improved. So is there anything where you think there should be more emphasis in Europe when tackling security issues and terrorism based on the experience of your own region?
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Leonard. Actually, the one that we can go further, I learned from Prof. Kauner how the European universities already link each other in the master and PhD program. So if we can benefit from this practice of European universities to enhance the master and PhD program here in Southeast Asia or in Indonesia, I am more than happy to learn, and then we can step up to offer to the university can come like wise Prof. Kauner already implement the master program, and then the master not only in one country, but they could have a mobility program to another university. That's actually one way to understand how the security and counter-terrorism in the perspective of the knowledge management could come up. And the second one, if we can go further and establish the same program, likewise, we have one semester right here in Indonesia, and then we could send, for example, 1 month or 1 semester to European countries or European universities. It might be benefit for Indonesian universities to see the practice and then how to see the situation from a near side. One more thing, actually, the program that I learned from Prof. Kauner, how the not only master, but right now they have a program in PhD that the recruitment come from different universities. It might be a good collaboration to see not only from one place or one university research center, but could exchange the information. So somehow I would like to learn further and more about this kind of situation, and then we can copy and paste, or somehow we can come with the likewise this kind of program. So I'm thinking that to strengthen the security discourse and the counterterrorism, we can come from the side of university, and then when we can train our next generation through master and PhD program, it could beneficial for everyone. Thank you, Prof. Leonard.
Thank you so much. And Mimi, there's a question in the chat box for you. So what is the Philippine government doing in reaching out to the global community about the threats posed by China and its bullying, I'm quoting, tactics? So to what extent is the Philippine government, reaching out to other governments or the global community in general?
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Sarah, for that question from the audience. I think one way to counter that is the Philippines continues to work with our allies. We have special security cooperation with Japan, US, Australia, and also with we have recently signed maritime cooperation agreement with Brunei, with New Zealand. So, and we are extending to the extra regional partners like the European Union. So the Philippines follows the international humanitarian law, and we also pursue peaceful means to resolve our conflict with China. So one way in which we try to manage this is by having joint patrols with our allies in the area to minimize the tensions. And recently, in an op-ed that I wrote last month in Singapore, I proposed the inclusion of Filipino-American Navy personnel in the regular patrols we hold in South China Sea. There are 12,000 Filipino-American Navy officers in the U.S. Navy, so we can invite them to do the patrols with the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, Freddy, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I just wanted to make a follow-up question on posed to Mimi, because she just mentioned about the US, and then I was going to ask, it's just a follow-up from that point to say, with now the change of government in the US, are they not worried about the new change of government coming in and what that means to the Philippines in terms of these issues around security, in terms of now having the Trump administration coming in? What's her view on that? Thank you.
I think I wrote a long piece on that. The Trump administration signals a stronger U.S.-Philippine relations because Trump has a greater appreciation of the cognitive warfare of China in the South China Sea. He released a report to the U.S. Congress during the first Trump administration, outlining the specific actions of cognitive warfare done by China in the South China Sea. So I foresee a stronger U.S.-Philippine security relations. And just this year, we received $500 million as additional security aid from the U.S. And we are getting more in the coming months. And also we are sending more Navy and Coast Guard officers to the U.S. at the U.S. Naval War College for training, and U.S. Army War College and U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. So I think these strong relations will continue with the Trump administration. And also, I'm speaking as a U.S. Marine Corps Fellow with the Vice President, J.D. Vance, as a U.S. Marine veteran. He also made a commitment for stronger U.S.-Philippine relations. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Mimi, for this very comprehensive answer. Thank you, really, for your questions as well. And I believe this is all we've got time for in this panel. It's been a very interesting round of presentations that has taken us to other parts of the world. And it's been very interesting to reflect on European security from different vantage points. So thank you so much to all the presenters and to the participants for their questions. And we now have a short break before we resume at 11 o'clock British or Irish time for the keynote lecture with Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler from the Extremism Programme. And he will be talking about terrorism financing of Hamas and Hezbollah, risk factors for Europe. So this promises to be extremely interesting as well. So I hope to see you back here at 11 o'clock British time or Irish time. So that is in 13 minutes. So thank you very much, everyone, and just see you later after the break.
By the way, in case you don't want to leave the room, no need to leave the room. You can just switch off your camera and then you're still here. See you.
See you, Prof. Thank you.
You're going to start recording again. Okay, great. So thank you. Thanks everyone for being back. We're absolutely delighted to have our guest speaker here for our special lecture. Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler is with us on an extremely important, extraordinarily topical, and really, really interesting, exciting topic about terrorism financing of Hamas and Hezbollah, the risk factors for Europe. Let me just give you a brief introduction for Dr. Schindler. He's had a career with the federal government of Germany from 2001 to 2011. He worked within the private sector from 2011 and 13, and as a member and coordinator of the ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban monitoring team of the United Nations Security Council until 2018, where he also advised the members of the Security Council on global counterterrorism sanctions. Dr. Schindler currently serves as the Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project and is a really great partner on our Marie Curie doctoral training network. So we're particularly delighted to have him here also on the EU Academy project. He's also the chair of the advisory group of BaFin Advisory and co-founder of the Berlin Anti-Financial Crime Forum, the co-chair of the advisory group of the Global Diplomatic Forum in London, a member of the International Advisory Board of the Global Counterterrorism Council in India, a member of the Board of Directors of Compliance and Capacity Skills International in New York and London, and he works as a teaching fellow at the Academy for Security in the Economy in Essen and chairs an UNODC GPML project in Vienna, bringing together financial investigators from government authorities, focusing on the combating of the financing of violent extremism. So we're really delighted to have you here. We're very much looking forward to the lecture. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Christian, for this very, very kind introduction. Really delighted to be here. Always wonderful, the kind of expertise that you and Sarah can always bring together in the framework of these EU projects. I really appreciate this. A quick introduction before I start with the presentation, who CP is and what we do. It's a transatlantic think tank, fully privately funded, so just individuals, not companies, not governments. We are having our main office in New York, but then a satellite office for Europe in Berlin, where I'm right now. and then people working for us in Washington, D.C., London, Brussels, Madrid, Munich, and then most recently in Oświęcim, better known by its German name, Auschwitz in Poland. The mandate of the Counter-Extremism Project is to work very closely and advise governments in North America and Europe exclusively on fighting what we call ideologically motivated violence. So everything from violent right-wing extremism, or RENV in the US context, to Islamist terrorism, which is going to be the topic of today. We have three big work buckets. One is internet regulation, i.e. making the internet space hostile for extremists and terrorists through government regulation. So we were very much involved in the German NetzDG, the Online Harms Act in the UK, but also the Digital Services Act and the Terrorist Content Online regulation at the EU level. Second bucket is a bit more operationally. That's prosecution, rehabilitation, reintegration of terrorist offenders. So we had the first pilot programs for this kind of topic in 3 penitentiaries, in federal penitentiaries in the United States, and currently on behalf of the US government work in the Maldives, in Kazakhstan, in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Albania, on building up networks of organizations that can receive released terrorist offenders and then hopefully reintegrate them in a productive way into their communities. And the third bucket is what is the topic of today, is countering the financing of violent extremism and terrorism, both online and offline. And in that work stream, of course, we've been working for quite a while on tackling, understanding, and tackling the finance networks of these two groups, but also others, including, of course, most recently, HTS in Syria has become quite relevant. I will go through a couple of points today. I will first focus, of course, on our approach to how you look at terrorism financing. This is going to be a bit more of an operational presentation that is meant to reverse a little bit the thinking at the moment, especially if you look at investigative authorities or financial institutions. They do a bottom-up approach, i.e. you look at the individual transaction, the individual perpetrators, and then figure out how that works. We have advised several governments successfully on taking a top-down approach, i.e. you first understand how the group finances itself, what are the general structures, where are the risk areas for your particular jurisdiction or your particular institution, and then you look at the individual cases in those risk areas, and then you build your topology. So a reversal. Then I look at the income streams of what we can see from Hamas as well as Hezbollah. I will, of course, talk about the methodology on how this is done, and then very quickly outline 2 major risk areas for Europe. Now, then we are talking about terrorism financing, and here you can see the eastern half of the global money laundering network of Hezbollah. When we're talking about financing of terrorism, you have to understand that the way that terrorism conducted, the structure in which terrorism is conducted, is very determining of what financial model that group or entity is going to adopt. There are 3 main structures, of course. There is the individual and perpetrator, the individual perpetrator or single cell. Here, of course, financial predictions and recognizing that there is going to be a looming attack is extremely hard, because this is just financing for one single act of violence, which means the sources are very limited that are needed and can be 100% legal, i.e. your savings, money from income, money from social help, money from family. Just to give you an example, the single perpetrator who did the knife attack on behalf of ISKP in Solingen simply purchased the knife in a supermarket, a normal kitchen knife. So here, financial information predominantly is important for the investigations after the fact, because it does potentially show some network of support, because no individual perpetrator or single cell is truly alone these days. They are not. The times of the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski are over. Everyone, of course, is connected online at least, and therefore the financial information will give you clues on how this works. Bigger, but not less complex, but having a chance of predictive, is financial information on network-based terror groups. So very, famously Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Here, the important part is that you need to understand the center in Syria for ISIS, or continuing to be under the protection of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, does no longer play a significant role in the financing of the individual affiliates, because most of the affiliates are outside, have been established as a already existing terror group that then pledged allegiance either to Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or switched from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. So they are exclusively responsible for their finances. There is at the moment only one exemption to the rule. So if you look at Jimin, if you look at Al-Shabaab, if you look at IS in the Philippines, there is one exception to the rule, and that is ISKP in Afghanistan, which does continuously receive money from the center in Syria via, interestingly, the IS office in Somalia. But this reason why this affiliate is the only one who gets financing from the center is that it's actually not an affiliate in the classical sense. ISKP is not an affiliate that existed as a fighting force or a network structure in Afghanistan and then switched alliances. This is the only one of two. The other one was IS in Libya, which essentially got destroyed in the civil war. The only remaining IS affiliate that the IS center purposefully built up in Afghanistan, i.e. they sent a delegation from Syria to Iraq and then built at the end of 2014, and then built this affiliate from the ground up, recruiting Taliban, recruiting Pakistani foreign fighters, recruiting other foreign fighters, including fighters from the Uzbekistan Islamic movement, in building up this affiliate. So it's not really an affiliate in the strict sense. It's more an extension of the center, and hence the center still feels responsible for financing to a certain extent what's going on with ISKP in Afghanistan. And then finally, you have terror groups with quasi-state structures, and this is what the topic of today is going to be. What are the characteristics of quasi-state structures when we're talking about terrorism financing? And here on the right, you can see a cryptocurrency Hamas scheme that the Israeli government uncovered long before October 7th already. What is the characteristic here? You have a very hierarchical structure and a central management of funds and assets. You have a need to be dependent on reliable, significant income streams, because your financial needs, if you're running something like the Gaza Strip, or you're running essentially Lebanon and really the southern part of the country very intensively, you need large hundreds of millions of euros and dollars budgets every year, because you need to build road, you need to make sure the electricity is provided, you have some water, you want to build some tunnels, right? And that means you have to have very large income streams, and you have to have several of those that are overlapping so that you compensate if any of the finance streams comes under pressure. And you will see that compensation at the moment is going on. You also need to have this centralized, because terrorists, as I always say, are not averse against stealing money from their own entity. Case in point, when the IS Caliphate broke down, numerous times the US forces in Iraq arrested IS high-ranking members with large sums of money that they were trying to take away while they were fleeing the counter-Daesh military operations. That means you have to have a central node where everything is controlled. You have to have checks and balances to make sure that no one gets any ideas when hundreds of millions of dollars flow in and then flow out again, right? And that means you have a wide variety of donations, economic activities, criminal enterprise, and I will illustrate that on the Hamas and Hezbollah example, right? The key here for anyone wanting to disrupt this is to figure out and disrupt the central asset management structure of these quasi-state structures. If you disrupt the central management structure, and my argument will be in neither one of those cases, these military operations have even begun to touch that central management structure of Hamas and Hezbollah, then you are able to outsize your individual impact on how the group is functioning. Now, let's have a little bit of a quick look on what are the various income streams of Hamas that are quite easily to identify. Donations, including donations via virtual assets, Then you have, of course, continuing state sponsorship by Iran, despite of all what's going on, investments and companies. I'll explain why that's still possible. The diversion of humanitarian aid in Gaza is a well-exercised and continuing income stream. Smuggling, anything that has been involved in smuggling in Gaza will get a cut to Hamas. And then, of course, any economic activities in Gaza until the 8th or 9th of October 2023 was taxed. They call it taxes, I call it extortion, because there was really no choice whether you wanted to give them money. Clearly, of course, the military operations have done something to these income streams. These are totally untouched, going on in certain extents, even increasing, and these had a major disruption, not a complete end, but a major disruption due to the military operations. That means half of the income streams are ticking along quite nicely and putting money in Hamas's pockets outside Gaza that are unreachable really with military means. So this is one aspect that the international community, the European governments should really look at if we want to achieve a sustained disruption of Hamas. Military operations, however successful they are buying a window of opportunity in which there is a phase of weakness of the terror organization. If, however, that window is not used to do less military, more financial operations to sustainably weaken that group, it is simply a factor of time and money to rebuild tunnels, to recruit new fighters, to train new commanders, or to procure new weapons. Anything in this world is, few things in this world are easier to procure for terrorist organizations than arms, ammunition, and explosive materials. Unfortunately, this is a sad truth that you can see in all of the conflict zones. Weapons are never the problem. So in order to make this sustainable, what you've achieved with your military operations, the finances should have started from the beginning and have started to a certain extent, but have not been disrupted in a way that we have two red circles here, unfortunately. Global donation drives, I just wanted to point this out, is of course one of the income streams. It's not a particularly strategic one. The Al-Quds International Foundation does operate in most jurisdictions outside of Europe and North America, and gives incomes to Hamas. However, here is a very interesting case on how this could be done. So Malaysia had, of course, its own Al-Quds Foundation branch, the Al-Quds Foundation Malaysia. Malaysia doesn't consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, as unfortunately most governments on the globe don't. However, the Malaysian government magically found out that there is some potential corruption going on with the Al-Quds Foundation Malaysia, closed it down on charges of corruption, which are apolitical. You don't have to explain that Hamas is a terror organization, but when they closed it down, the sum in question is $25 million just from that one national branch of the Quds Foundation. Gives you an idea of the scale, but also gives you an idea of what potentially could be done. Because these charitable organizations or quasi-charitable organizations are also regularly used by Iran to transfer money to Hamas. Because if you want to support a terrorist group in the tune of several $100 million, as Iran does in the case of Hamas and Hezbollah, you need to think very creatively, especially if you yourself are under heavy financial sanctions. Now, these kind of sums cannot be transferred in hard cash, cannot be transferred via some cryptocurrencies without really raising any suspicion. So you have to be creative. And one of the creative ways is to use these charitable foundations to launder and transfer some money towards Hamas. There is, however, also a network of Hamas companies. Currently, entities identified are in Turkey, in Sudan, in UAE, and Saudi Arabia. The central management of these sits in Turkey and Lebanon. The sectors that these companies operate are real estate, construction, investment, agriculture. Companies, therefore, also have to operate in the formal financial system. So Hamas actually does have bank accounts because Hamas is not considered a terror organization for example, in Turkey and Lebanon. Or if you want to look at the European theater, Hamas continues not to be considered a terror organization by the Swiss government. The Swiss government at the end of 2023 announced that they are going to pass a law. Apparently, the term financial flight doesn't mean much in Switzerland. A law banning Hamas a terror organization, and that legal procedure has not yet finished. Therefore, till today, in Zurich, you can open an account saying, I'm collecting money for Hamas, and the banks will have to accommodate you because they don't have a national legal framework that prevents them from doing. And that's unfortunately pretty much true for the rest of the globe outside North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Therefore, some of these companies are sanctioned, but continue to operate. Here, by the way, is the most famous of those companies, now sanctioned twice by the US government, and that's the share price of about 2 weeks ago of Trend GYO on the Istanbul Stock Exchange. Here, this company, which my organization has been lobbying hard until it was finally sanctioned by the US government in 2022, this company is not only run as a CEO by someone who is Hamas, but also the board members are Hamas. And so it's very obvious what's going on, yet you can still buy shares if you so inclined on the Istanbul Stock Exchange, which means there are Turkish bank accounts attached to it. There is correspondent banking challenge that is attached to it. And there is, of course, any economic cooperation with the Istanbul Stock Exchange, which can't help even if they would want to get Trend GYO off its systems. On what legal grounds would they do that if Hamas is not a terror organization? And strictly speaking, neither US nor European sanctions are legally valid in Turkey, and hence you see this share price, of course, in Turkish lira. Now, efforts by Hamas did not just concentrate on doing this in jurisdictions where you have no Hamas terror declaration. They also did that in Europe, right? So the Savaya Group for Development Investment, Sociedad Limitada in Spain, real estate purchase and management company, was only sanctioned by the US in October 2023 and by the EU in January 2024. That's the logo, right? Here are the sanctions decisions from both sides. But there is a very curious case within the European Union jurisdiction, that's Mats Holding in Cyprus. Now, Mats Holding in Cyprus, this is the current company registry information from Malta. And here, interesting, Abdel Basit Hamza, who is a Hamas member, has been sanctioned by the US in 2023 in October and by the EU in January 2024. Yet, Mats Holding Limited is still operating in Cyprus because Mats Holding, for whatever unimaginable reasons, have not been sanctioned as a company. So the key decision maker in the company is sanctioned. The company itself is not sanctioned, which puts every single financial institution, not only in Cyprus, but in the rest of the European Union, in an impossible legal situation. Because yes, you cannot allow Abdel Basit Hamza to have an account, but what about Mats Holding as a company? And what happens if Mats Holding opens an account in the name of someone else who may be the beneficial owner or quasi-beneficial owner of Mats Holding? You cannot simply, without legal grounds, close or refuse to open those accounts, and there are no. So this is also a European problem. If we are not getting better with actually enforcing our own sanction strategy within the financial industry in Europe, what hope there is for the rest of the world to tackle Hamas finance. Now, I have said that Hamas and the diversion of humanitarian aid and the taxation and the smuggling activities, the money that came out from, has been diminished. Here, just in brackets, everyone paid Hamas until October 7th, 2023, because Hamas levied taxes on just about anything, including humanitarian aid that went into Gaza, development aid that went into Gaza. So the pronouncement of European governments that they never paid Hamas is a legalistic formulation, but absolutely not true. However, you can see here that the diversion of humanitarian aid is still going on. This is already a couple of weeks old picture of Hamas actually hijacking the entire aid truck from the UAE meant, as you can see, for those affected in the Gaza Strip, meant they are now actually diverted from Gaza. And we have the World Food Programme and the World Kitchen suspending aid transports into Gaza, not because Israel doesn't let them in, because they say they cannot guarantee that it doesn't immediately get stolen in Gaza. They talk about criminal groups. I can guarantee you there's a very little criminality in a war situation. This is Hamas. This is also the reason why the Israeli government has yet to arrest a emancipated Hamas fighter in Gaza. The emancipated people are the population of Gaza, which Hamas purposefully deprives of the food by stealing it and diverting it, and therefore increasing, as part of their strategy, of course, the international pressure on Israel to stop before their structures are completely destroyed in Gaza. So, of course, the Iranian flow is continuing. Now let's have a look at what are the income streams for Hezbollah, which are very similar to those from Hamas. Again, donations including virtual assets, state sponsorship by Iran to a certain extent until a couple of days ago from Syria as well, investment in companies, of course, transport sale of drugs globally, which is something that Hezbollah does unique, including money laundering as a service, including money laundering for other criminal networks for a fee. Perfect. Taxing and extortion on the Lebanese community globally. It is something that has not been tackled by European and other companies. So if you are a successful Lebanese businessman, sooner or later, you will get a visit by the representatives of the Party of God, i.e. Hezbollah, who will make clear to you that as a Lebanese, you will have to give your obolus for the good cause, i.e. fighting Israel. You are absolutely free to pay this tax voluntarily, or if you have a little bit of a problem motivating yourself to pay, and this doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Sunni or Shia abroad, these representatives of the Party of God will make very clear what will happen to your family and relatives back in Lebanon if you have some problems motivating yourself, transferring that money to the Party of God. Now, this is a clear, organized global extortion system. The problem, and I know this from my time when I was part of the German security authorities, the problem here is, of course, finding witnesses, because, of course, the very same people who are extorted here also know what will happen if they start talking and actually explaining how this extortion system works to their families back home. However, given the current weakness of Hezbollah, I think there's a window of opportunity to actually tackle this issue in a far more organized and systematic manner than we have done in the past. And then finally, of course, economic activities in Lebanon. Now, there is only one red cycle here, because all of the other income streams of Hezbollah are untouched by the immense military weakness that Hezbollah at the moment is experiencing in Lebanon. That also means this military weakness and the now, hopefully, functioning ceasefire will give an opportunity for Hezbollah to rebuild itself. Now, with the loss of Syria and the Assad regime, the resupply of the terrorist and military assets by Iran is going to be more complex, but I would invite anyone to tell me that smuggling is not going to do this. Now, of course, it's going to get harder. The Israeli government prevents transport planes from Tehran to land in Beirut as we speak, and the land bridge now with Syria is gone, and there's literally no one left in Syria who wants to cooperate with the Iranians on any shape or form. All of the power brokers in Syria have their own particular terrorism problems. However, definitely the cooperation with Iran is over. This means it will take longer, but it's not going to be impossible. It's now going to be done by smuggling. Again, this is a question of time, if those income streams are not touched. Now, just to make clear, of course, they're fully integrated in the financial sector. Not only are there financial institutions that hold bank accounts for Hezbollah in Lebanon, Al-Ghadir Al-Hassan Association, you saw what happened to the building in Beirut when the Israeli bombed this. This is, I would say, nearly a desperation move. This was, of course, a financial institution which was fully owned by Hezbollah, as is this money exchanger and cryptocurrency, CTEX. Bombing the building, of course, again, opens up a window of opportunity. A building can be rebuilt, but the money is still there. because money is not held in vaults anymore. Money is held in a virtual form now at bank accounts that are no longer physically somewhere in a vault having gold. So here the financial sector still plays a role and presents a major risk for any company engaging in Lebanon in anything, because there's also on top of that, of course, the control over some companies. Here's just a couple of examples that are fully Hezbollah companies in the building sector in Lebanon, right? We have regular sanctions of US and the EU of companies with clear links to Europe. For example, Global Trading Group, GTG, NV in Belgium, sanctioned by the US in 2018, not sanctioned by the EU, I might add. Here's the logo, because, sorry, I can't go back. Okay, let me try to go back. Because the problem is we make a very fine, totally academic distinction between the military wing of Hezbollah and the political wing of Hezbollah in EU law. Several countries, including the United Kingdom and Germany, have now finally decided that Hezbollah as a whole needs to be sanctioned. And I'll get to the point why this is actually a prudent move to make when it comes especially to the money, because when it comes to the money flows, this is a 100% academic distinction. But EU law is EU law, and as long as Hezbollah is not fully sanctioned as a terrorist group, of course, any organization or any company can claim that they, of course, working for the political, in inverted commas, arm of Hezbollah and not for its military wing, as Global Trading Group, GTG, claimed to have done, hence sanctioned by the US, but not by the European Union. Now, what is really unique, apart from the Taliban, from Hezbollah, is really that Hezbollah has a global transport and distribution networks for drugs out of the Middle East. Now, this is the distribution network because the predominant amount of drugs that Hezbollah purchases in South America and transports is going towards Europe. And the key thoroughfare, and that's why I have this particular helpful slide here, is West Africa. Here, something really astonishing is happening, because here in West Africa, where those cocaine and hashish procurements land at the coast of Guinea and then get transported through West Africa into North Africa for onwards transport to Europe, here we have large swathes of territory where these drugs flow through that are either, if you talk about Burkina Faso, now under the control of JNIM, the Al-Qaeda coalition, i.e. 40 to 45% of Burkina Faso, pretty much everything around Ouagadougou is under the control of JNIM. And then when you talk about Mali, 45 to 50% of the territory is now under control of the Islamic State Sahel province and parts of JNIM. Now, you may remember what happened to people smoking a cigarette in Syria under ISIS control. They were executed for being drug abusers. Now, here is cocaine transports, and it flows through ISIS territory beautifully uninhibited. There is not one report of anyone of those cocaine transports ever being disrupted or hindered or destroyed by ISIS or Al-Qaeda when it flew through that territory. Because here we have the perfect combination of Hezbollah's interest to make money, JNIM and ISIS's interest to generate employment for the population under control, logistics services, i.e. transporting things from A to B is a part of employment scheme, and of course transnational organized crime really involved in the money laundering. So here you have this combination where it's very clear that there is no hesitation of large-scale criminal networks and Shia and Sunni terrorist networks to actually cooperate very seamlessly and very collegially with each other, as long as it is enough mutual benefit that can be achieved. So here really a clear indication of an income stream that is not only helping Hezbollah and therefore detrimental to us all, but in particularly also financing, in addition to Hezbollah, of course, also Al-Qaeda and IS networks very close to the European border, totally uninhibited, as you may remember, since 2022, first the French, then the UN, then the international troops, then the US are all withdrawn from West Africa. The EU has now sent 20 people to the Ivory Coast in a counterterrorism mission. I'm not sure. I know EU officials are always taken by 1,000 in their impact in the region, but I'm still doubtful that 20 are really appropriate to the issue, because it's very clear both Jinim and IS are moving southwards, are threatening the littoral coast of the Gulf of Guinea, and conducting more and more terror attacks in those. So I'm not quite sure whether we should continue to really ignore what's going on here. Just on another side note, every single group of refugees and migrants from every part of the world has dropped towards the EU, except refugees from West Africa. If you talk to the Spanish government, the Canary Islands are now there's so many migrants there that they stopped even biometrically registering those migrants, because they simply can no longer handle the numbers. So it is an immediate crisis that has already reached the European Union. Now, of course, there's also a global structure to generate donations for Hezbollah, again, also misused, of course, as a way for Iran to transfer money for the Hezbollah. These two main groups are the Islamic Resistance Support Association, as well as the MDAT Committee for Islamic Charity. These yellow hands you may have seen even in Berlin, when we still had the annual Quds Day demonstrations until 1999, until first COVID and then a administrative ban prevented them from happening, or moving towards Düsseldorf now, where the Quds Day is happening, you would have still seen those yellow hands. That's pretty much a 100% key aspect of Hezbollah, not only money laundering, but also donation generation worldwide. Now, let's look a little bit at the methodology, because time is already going on quite fast. I have spoken about the central management of the income and expenditure. This is how it looks. This is the structure of Hezbollah. All the money, so on the left side, this is a very helpful graphic that Threat Insights has made a couple of months ago. All on the left side, you see the income streams, the various companies and donations and cryptocurrency schemes. They flow up to the political office and then go to the Shura Council. And there and only there do you have the decision whether the individual dollar or euro is spent on weapons procurement, for a hospital, for a street, for repairing a ballistic missile. Here, the central structure is the Shura Council. Now, the head of Hamas is dead, Hassan Nasrallah. The entire political command, the entire military terrorist command structure of the Radwan Brigade is dead. The Jihad Council, no survivors. So Israel removed every single individual who was on the Jihad Council of Hezbollah. The political office, the Shura Council, is fully staffed. Apart from Mr. Haniyeh, who was part, of course, by virtue of his position, and then Mr. Sinwar, no one in the Shura Council has been physically touched or arrested by any of the governments so far, which means the Shura Council, which manages all the incomes, is still fully functioning. Same, by the way, here for Hamas. You have the consultative Shura Council, where all of the money flows in, and then, of course, they make the decision where these finances are supposed to be going, right? A direct line down from the Shura Council to the financial office of Hezbollah. Now, here, sorry, I confused which graph is for which, but the structure is the same. Income stream and then decision-making by the Shura Council, both, by the way, called the same. Now, here again, both for Hezbollah as well as for Hamas, none of the members of the Shura Council have been removed. You had the military leadership being removed or arrested in both groups. You had none of the Shura Council members so far touched. So that means for Hamas, the finance structure that is managed in Turkey and Lebanon, these individuals are still operating. For Hezbollah, the finance structure in Lebanon is still operating. And since we have this central Shura Council in both groups making the exclusive decisions what happens with the money, distinguishing, luckily for Hamas, the European Union is no longer doing this, but for Hezbollah, it continues to do that, distinguishing between money for a political effort of Hezbollah and money going for military efforts for Hezbollah makes no sense. Because even if you have the best of intentions, your money goes to the Shura Council. And the Shura Council, not you as the donor, not you as the company that generates the money, not you as the cryptocurrency exchange that forwards the money, has any impact on the decision of where the euro or dollar is going. The Shura Council and only the Shura Council decides that. Hence, the distinction, which is useful for the diplomatic terms, for the money makes really no sense. Because even if you wanted to go to, we had a group in Germany called Waisenkinder Libanon, Orphans of Lebanon, that's collected money for orphans in Lebanon. Unfortunately, then the Shura Council decided to spend that only on orphans that were orphans of killed Hezbollah fighters. You simply can't guide that from Germany or anywhere else where you're running a company on behalf of these terrorist groups. Now, unfortunately, because we are talking about several million US dollars that are transferred every year, every single transfer method is used, bank transactions, money couriers, Hawala, virtual assets, very often also, of course, in combination. Hence, if you start regulating your financial sector, cryptocurrency is one, money service providers, another regulation, virtual assets are another regulation, money, Hawala to a certain extent is regulated or not regulated, and you have those in silos that actually are not allowed or able to talk to each other, you will not find really the transaction because you're looking at one part of a broader puzzle. And if you're blind because the regulation is different when you are in a bank and you have a virtual asset transfer and you can't request or get information from those business partners, you will not see the transaction, including, of course, when it comes to actually quite sophisticated schemes, trade-based money laundering. This is really due to the fact that Iran needs to transfer such large amounts. I've already said that the charitable sector is misused to a certain extent by both groups to do this for Iran. This is also true for quite interesting global schemes. Now here, the US government, just as an illustrative example on how this is normally working, has sanctioned a quite an interesting oil for money for terrorism scheme here. Now, what happened was that, of course, the Iranian government has a problem selling oil. And of course, the Iranian government has a problem getting money for the oil. So what happened is a Russian company, now equally sanctioned, purchased on paper Iranian oil. However, none of the oil was actually flowing anywhere near Russia. It was immediately transported to the Syrian government, which then used the oil and paid not the Russian or the Iranians, but paid the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Quds Force stationed in Syria for that oil that was on paper sold by a Russian company, was actually Iranian oil. So paid those Iranian Quds forces who then forwarded the money to Hamas and Hezbollah. Now, this is, of course, a scheme that in the last couple of weeks, the last 2 weeks, has become no longer really as possible as before. But there are also other trade-based money laundering schemes involving Southeast Asia, where something like this is still going on. So, including very sophisticated ways to financing terrorism, meaning there's an overlap of your counter money laundering and fraud investigations and terrorism financing. And again, here, the silos play a very unhelpful role because you have very good expertise, usually in the financial sector and in governments, on money laundering, because that's where the taxpayers' money can be recouped, and very different and very separate terrorism financing expertise, and those rarely ever meet. So here again, not only regulatory silos, but also investigative silos need to be, at least for a certain time until some effect has been achieved, overcome, especially since we also, of course, talk about a continuous misuse of virtual assets. Hamas was indeed one of the first terrorist groups who actually played with virtual assets. It was also the most innovative group when it comes to cryptocurrency donation schemes, because it has developed quite a few years ago when it was kicked out by Coinbase, because Coinbase is a US-based company, and they realized Hamas financing was going on. Hamas went to other exchanges and developed the software that generates one-time wallets for donors, which means there's a QR code, you scan that QR code, an individually personal wallet is created for you, to which you pay your cryptocurrency donation, and then that wallet then transfers the cryptocurrencies to the central wallet of Hamas, which means for all the investigators in Europe or in America, in order to get a view on the blockchain on where it was going on, you have to finance terrorism in order to actually investigate the financing of terrorism. And that's something that Hamas evolved quite smartly. And that's why I was really shocked to see that the announcement of April 2023 was 100% misinterpreted, overinterpreted, maybe because the Arabic wasn't good, maybe the translation wasn't good, maybe it was willful by the industry, because there was this big announcement. Finally, the Al-Qassam brigades, from the most sophisticated first terror group, or one of the first terror group who misuse virtual assets, is saying, we no longer want cryptocurrencies. What they actually said is, we no longer want Bitcoins, which is only a statement of fact, because all of the terrorist and extremist groups that we as the Counter-Extremism Project are looking at no longer using Bitcoins. They understand an increasing amount of governments know how to do blockchain analysis with Bitcoin and how to exploit the relative transparency of Bitcoin transactions in the blockchain, and are moving towards privacy coins such as Monero, first and foremost, but also Zcash and others. So the announcement was, however, taken as if cryptocurrencies are no longer an issue. And then, of course, shortly afterwards, we had quite some major seizures, both by OFAC and the Israeli government, on exactly Hamas fundraising via cryptocurrencies. Now, you can argue a lot on whether this was all of it Hamas financing or part of it Hamas financing, but it's very clear, even in the Arabic original of the statement, that no way were the Qassam brigades saying they no longer want cryptocurrencies. They just don't want Bitcoin because it's easy to find and seize for government. Hezbollah has been less innovative, but they also switched away from Bitcoins to drone and tether systems, which again encrypt both the wallets as well as the blockchain, which makes blockchain analysis quite an adventure. Unless you know where the cash in and cash out point is, the blockchain is no longer visible. So it's really a technological challenge, but they too, of course, have continued to raise donations and transfer assets and secure assets in the form of virtual currency. Now, of course, because they're misusing cryptocurrencies, there's also, of course, the misuse of online platforms going on. And you can see here on the top is Hamas, on the bottom is Hezbollah, and you can see some of quite familiar names of what this cryptocurrency or this donation drive via social media entails, i.e. the payment mechanisms are still working very functionally, including companies who are actually having a quite large US base without being disrupted. The reason is that the platforms, and unfortunately including crowdfunding platforms, so we're talking about the Meta Group or Twitter, my organization, the Counter-Extremism Project, just by the way, wrote an open letter to X as well as OFAC a couple of weeks ago, basically highlighting a ongoing arms deal by the Houthis, who, by the way, are now again a listed terror group on the SDN list of the United States, an arms deal that the Houthis conducted on Twitter openly, both sides having blue check marks, which also, as a little aside, Twitter receives $8 a month from the Houthis, a listed terror organization in the United States, and has not disclosed who gives the $8, what are the accounts of the $8, or what credit cards are used to have those $8. But even worse than that, that account is now conducting international arms deals openly on X. Because if you look very closely into the terms of service of these platforms, they talk a lot about terrorism. They talk a lot about fraud. They talk a lot about supporting terrorism. They do not have the sentence, we do not allow terrorism financing on our platform. Now, even if you could inform the terms of services, i.e. you could hold the company liable for not doing what it says in the terms of service. And by the way, you can't. We at the Counter-Extremism Project, together with a couple of other organizations in Germany, actually try to bring forward a class action lawsuit, and it doesn't look good. So if you see terms of services, these are promises of the platforms, not something that is legally enforceable, i.e. if they completely ignore it, you cannot sue them for doing so. But if it's not in there, not even in those terms of services, you will not have a monitoring structure, neither human nor software-based, a content monitoring structure looking for that. If you want to have a case in point on where we are as far as quality control is concerned, in 2022, the Canadian government actually regulated crowdfunding platforms as it would have, similar to any other financial service provider, and asked them to look at fraud, look at money laundering, look at terrorism finance. In 2023, the official number of suspicious actions reports, i.e. if a bank or financial institution sees something that looks like fraud or money laundering or terrorism financing, they have to send a suspicious action report to the financial regulator in Canada or anywhere else in the world. The number of those reports received from crowdfunding platforms in Canada was 0, which only leaves 2 options. Number one, every single Canadian citizen is a 100% law-abiding citizen, and crowdfunding platforms are not misused for anything but, no fraud, no money laundering, no terrorism financing at all for an entire year in Canada, or the internal systems or even of crowdfunding platforms, which are set up to organize donation drives. So the thought that the one or other terror organizations may just about get the idea that they could be using this set up electronic system to generate donations for them, right, is not working the way it should. The fact that there is 0 suspicious actions on every single crowdfunding platform in Canada for 12 months is simply a very, very hard proposition to believe, right? Same, by the way, if you see the names here, the reason why they're here and they're not realizing what's going on is that know your customer control and due diligence procedures by payment service providers is not done by these payment service providers anymore. You have what it's called nested service, i.e. you have the payment service provider. I'm not going to name any names here, but choose any one of the list. They only do the actual transaction. They have another subcontractor company who onboards entities, who has another subcontractor company who onboards the individuals who actually operate. All of these companies have, and then they have a subcontractor for the electronics and subcontractor for the guaranteeing of the transaction security. All of these have in their contracts that they have to do know your customer due diligence. However, at the end point, the company responsible for the transaction, the due diligence and KYC information is not received because it rests on these other companies to do that. They may or may not do that, but the big famous company has no idea who they're transferring money for. That's what they have, the subcontractors. So with these nested services, you also have a breakdown of controls within the transaction path that is, to say the least, very unhelpful. Now, that, of course, also means that you have a very nice, super unhelpful stovepiping of information, right? So the platforms, the crowdfunding platforms, the Meta Group, X, has the names of the users, the identity of the users. Even it's a make-up name, but it has at least an IP address. The exchanges, when it comes to cryptocurrency transactions, and the stuff that's blocked out here and on the top thing is also cryptocurrency QR codes that are used to transfer cryptocurrencies. They see the blockchain, and then your payment service providers and your banks who actually move the money only see the financial flows. When it comes to crowdfunding platforms, and there is one single node where all the money gets transferred to, they do what is called block transactions, i.e. all the money goes in large, many donations, combined transactions to the final receiver. All of the information is there to figure out, if anyone wanted to look at that this is a terrorism financing, but everyone in this picture is pointing to the next desk, right? So the platform says, I'm not moving the money, I'm just providing an electronic platform. I'm Facebook, right? I have no idea, I have no involvement. The others should do that. The financial service provider says, I have all of these subcontractors. They should do that. The banks are saying, I only get a money moving order from one of the payment service providers or the cryptocurrency exchanges. They should know what's going on. So there is really no part where this information comes together. And you can actually understand that both the sender as well as the receiver, or at least the receiver, is a terrorist entity. Hence, we need to overcome those stovepipe regulations as well as data. And as we are living in the land of data protection, and I'm here in Germany where data protection is really a stronger religion than any religion any German whatever had in the past. We never believed in anything as strongly as data protection. This is, of course, a nightmare. Now we want to bring all of these data fields together. Well, if we want to fight terrorism financing or money laundering or any other financial crime, we better get a grip on that. We have to bring those data together and should be thinking innovatively about how this could be done while respecting individual freedoms and data protection. Now, to come to a close, because we are nearly at the end of the time that I'm supposed to speak, two main risk areas remain for Europe. Of course, donations. You have regularly sham charitable organizations that are uncovered. You have an ongoing donation drive via social media, crowdfunding, and virtual assets, mostly now by privacy coins, not yet one single case being prosecuted. And of course, in most countries in Europe, Hezbollah has not been regulated. In Germany, the situation is you can use Hezbollah and everything is okay. If you are in Hezbollah Dar, you now be committing a crime, which is a bizarre way of saying we don't like Hezbollah, but we know that a lot of individuals who work here need to send money to families in countries where there is not a firm banking structure, and they need to have a way to send that, which means we're disincentivizing the Hezbollah Dars who have the information, who is sending money to whom and where, from actually keeping records. Australia has regulated Hezbollah many, many years ago. So did Indonesia, so did Djibouti, so did even Afghanistan before the Taliban took over. In none of these cases, the Hezbollah system broke down. In all of these cases, investigative efforts and successes were achieved. But here in European Union, we still always talking about Hezbollah as if it's something that is unregulatable or would break down if you even think about asking the Hezbollah Dars, decriminalizing them, and at least retaining a rump of customer identification information. And the second one is really very specific towards Hamas and Hezbollah, because these are not considered terrorist organizations in many jurisdictions, including jurisdictions which there is a large-scale economic transaction from the European Union with, such as Turkey, including Turkish banks having branches here in Germany or in Europe. And anything to do with correspondence banking, anything to do with transactions with these affiliates is a very impossible to solve legal situation. Of course, Germany considers Hamas and Hezbollah fully as a terrorist organization. Of course, the European Union considers Hamas completely and the military wing of Hezbollah as a terror organization. The jurisdictional center of these Turkish banks, however, does consider neither one of them as terrorist organizations. So what you're going to do as a Turkish bank in London or in Frankfurt or in Madrid, when you get a money order that involves any of those listed companies, you have no legal basis from your mother house to actually refuse the transaction, while at the same time you have maximum pressure to do exactly that from the European Union. So there needs to be some risk awareness that this is now becoming a major problem, in particular as the Middle East continues to destabilize. Now, that's the remarks that I wanted to make, and very much looking forward to your questions.
Hello, everyone. It's great to have you all here. And we are now with the next panel, 1B, titled The European Union, Its Neighborhood and the Challenges of Enlargement. And we have 4 great speakers, and let's start with the first one, Dr. Christian Nitwiu, I hope I pronounced it wrong, apologize in advance, from Loughborough University, London. He will talk about the EU strategy and the peace resilience nexus. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ori, and thank you, Sarah and Christian, for organizing this. So this is a work in progress. I'm somewhere in the middle of doing the empirical research for this. And the starting point is the question whether or not the European Union is still a peace project. And we've all seen how the European Union, at least in the last 5 years, with the von der Leyen Commission, has branded itself as geopolitical. And there's a lot of research showing that the EU has now a more of a crisis or emergency type of discourse or strategy towards the world. Some scholars are arguing that, including myself, that this has meant that the European Union has renounced on its ambitious goals of having a stronger presence in the world, and it's more inward focus and trying to ensure its existence. And through this process, the European Union is basically framing the outside world as a source of external threats. Now, if we look at the war in Ukraine or even the COVID pandemic, before, the European Union embraced the concept of resilience almost fully and tried to apply it throughout its policy. So during the COVID pandemic, we had the plans for national resilience. And with the war in Ukraine, there's a larger focus on building defense resilience, particularly through increased spending in this area, but also for achieving unity. So there's an argument here that the European Union has been largely reactive rather than proactive in dealing with all of these crises. But in the background, the question that my paper wants to answer is whether or not this signifies a broader shift in the way peace is understood by the European Union. So is the European Union still attached to the idea of representing a peace project? And if we were to go 20 years ago, for example, peace was a center aspect of the EU strategy. So I'm sure we all know that the European Union throughout its existence focused on the idea of achieving in its neighborhood, but also in the international system, peace through persuasion, through dialogue, through changing the other, through transforming the international system in order to create a sort of dialogue between states. But now we seem to move from this idea of peace through persuasion, through dialogue, to a concept of peace through strength. So peace through building resilience to external threats, rather than peace through engagement with the others. And I would say that to some extent, this idea of peace through strength was also part of, let's say, the EU strategy, even 30 or 40 years ago, when people were discussing the creation of an EU army, when we had those debates about the European Union as a civilian power in the 1980s. But even though the EU strategy was obviously not formalized up until the beginning of the 2000s, there was this tension between peace through persuasion and peace through strength, which was settled towards embracing the idea that the EU was a peace project in itself, and the very existence of the European Union was a guarantee for peace on the European continent, in its neighborhood, but also an inspiration for creating peace more globally. But in the last decade, we've seen this perception or this framing of the EU as a peace project become rather muted. So in the paper, I used the concept of normalization in order to understand how gradually the framing of the European Union as a peace project has shifted towards a stronger emphasis, let's say, on the EU having to deal with external threats almost constantly, and not necessarily trying to promote peace in its neighborhood or around the world. So normalization is a concept that primarily comes from discourse studies, and scholars use it in order to try to understand how populists try to normalize hate speech, for example, or extreme nationalist rhetoric. So it basically tries to identify how strategies are initiated and recontextualized in order to create a new normative order. So in order to change norms that define what is legitimate to think about the specific actors. In our case, normalization recontextualizes the identity of the European Union in the world and in the neighborhood, of course. And at the same time, it also reframes the purpose, the goals, the ontology of the self, and the relations that the European Union perceives itself to be having with other actors in the world order. So as I mentioned earlier, I look at the various iterations of the EU strategy, as well as the speeches that high representatives and of the EU high reps have produced in the last 10 years. And I try to chart first how the peace narrative has morphed now into a strength and deterrence narrative, and how did this process create a new normal in terms of the way the EU presents itself. So about 20 years ago, if we go back again, scholars were looking at the European Union through the lens of normative power. So the normal back then was viewing the European Union as being able to promote a sense of international peace through engaging with other countries and persuading them to resolve tensions through dialogue, through engagement, rather through the use of strength. And the core idea here was that the EU shared these universal values with other countries, and through engagement, it allowed them to change for a very abstract notion of universal good. The shift in the way the EU perceives itself started a bit more than a decade ago with the range of crises that the European Union faced, like the Arab Spring, the Ukraine crisis, the migrant crisis, and resilience became a centerpiece in this new normal that was starting to appear at the time. So resilience has the ability to manage, predict, and bounce back from crisis. It was seen as a miracle cure. And probably, I would say, the most important strategy document that the EU has produced up until now, the Global Strategy of 2016, made resilience a centerpiece. And this can be seen as a crucial turning point where peace, the peace narrative and the EU as a peace project is starting to be replaced by the idea that the EU needs to secure itself in relation to external threats. So peace cannot be achieved just by the EU existing, but now it needs to act in order to become, let's say, more secure in relation to all of the threats that were perceived at the time to be coming from global actors, but primarily in its neighborhood. Let's say the assertiveness of Russia in the eastern neighborhood, but also the various waves of migration coming from the southern neighborhood. And gradually, resilience became normalized in the vocabulary of EU policymakers, and now it permeates almost every document and speech that EU policymakers produce. But it was also used to legitimize a move from the European Union towards embracing some of its own, let's say, priorities, rather than focusing on developing a rather global agenda. So in a way, it was used to legitimize the failure of the European Union to live up to some of its more ambitious goals that it has set in the past. For example, during the 2000s, the idea of EU as a peace project was also linked to the EU being able to shape some of the key norms around global governance. And the shift towards resilience, the normalization of resilience, can also be seen at the time between 2016 to 2020 as a way of the EU trying to understand where it should place itself in the world order, considering all of the challenges that it experienced during that decades, for example, during the Ukraine crisis or during the migrant crisis. And with the war in Ukraine, the peace project and the idea that the EU embodies peace in itself, I would say, has been completely replaced by the need to secure the EU's own existence and achieving a sense of peace through strength. And now the result of this normalization of a deterrence and strength narrative within the European Union is that peace has basically become a tainted word. Talking about peace I would say, can get you in a bit of trouble if you don't qualify this particular concept. So the European Union now defines it in its strategy as an expression of resilience. Peace is the result of the ability to withstand constant threats, particularly from authoritarian states, from states that do not want to play by the rules of the liberal world order. So peace as a concept is no longer framed within EU strategy as something that is good in itself. It from that perspective has become let's say, a concept that can be easily manipulated by authoritarian states in order to suit their own interests. So peace is achieved now through strength and deterrence, not dialogue and engagement. And what's interesting is that the peace project was normalized in a period when the EU didn't perceive that it was facing major international challenges. But with the decade of crisis, the 2010s, the greater the challenges that it experienced internationally, the more it focused on resilience, which, as I mentioned earlier, managed to displace peace. So I'm very much in the middle of doing the empirical analysis. These are some initial findings, very broad findings. But what's interesting, I've also started looking at the speeches of national leaders, especially populist leaders like Fico in Slovakia or Orban in Hungary, and they have a different understanding of peace. They seem to have clung to this idea of the EU as a peace project. And it's a bit of a paradox, because they are obviously two of the more Eurosceptical leaders in Europe, and they are the ones who are trying to steer the European Union back to its more idealistic foundation around the EU embodying a peace project. But one explanation that the literature on populism puts forward for this is that they're actually trying to gain something. They're trying to gain some sort of leverage in relation to other actors in the European Union by presenting this idea of this founding idea of the EU embodying a peace project, and basically showing that they're representing the true Europe. So, and I'm sure you've seen the confrontation that Zelensky and Orban recently had on X, where Orban argued that peace could have been achieved in Ukraine, but Zelensky didn't want to go forward. And at the same time, Zelensky said that there's no point to discuss with aggressors, and Hungary should not engage in this. So again, if you have any comments, I'm very happy to take them, because this is, I would say, very much a work in progress now.
Thank you so much, Christian. And let's move forward to our next speaker.
Sorry, Ori, we were just going to take the questions now for Christian.
The question now.
Because he
sorry.
has to go.
Yes, please. Shall I? You're going to deliver this, Sarah, or shall I do it?
Or just ask if there are any questions or comments right now for Christian.
I see. I ask everyone in the chat, but until now, no one has any question. So this is a great opportunity to ask Christian any questions. Anyone?
Well, I had one. I was just wondering how, especially because you mentioned Orban and Zelensky towards the end. So what are your thoughts on the role that the European Union has played, and how, in terms of the reaction to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine? So how does that affect your argument, and is that a good illustration of your argument?
Yeah, I mean, the European Union has focused a lot on developing its defense capabilities in the last 3 years in order to be able to support Ukraine's military approach towards Russia. But I don't think it's so. From my empirical research, there's very little discussion about the EU acting as a peace project in Ukraine. So the focus is on showing Putin that we're strong, because this is the only language that Putin understands. And this is repeated in various forms, both in strategy documents as well as in speeches. Whether or not this strategy narrative has permeated into policy, that's a different question, and I haven't looked at that. But there are other people who are saying that actually there's a big contrast between what the EU is saying and what it has been able to do. And to some extent, maybe leaders like Orban or Fico have been able to put the brakes on the implementation of some ideas. And even some of the more pro-Ukrainian countries, I think, have been quite reluctant to put quite a lot of funding behind providing military support to Ukraine. So obviously Zelensky very often argues that we've been promised various things, but the European Union or the United States has not really delivered. But the focus has been on creating these more autonomous defense capabilities, especially coordination in the defense industry, which are some aspects I think with 20 or 30 years ago, people would have been quite surprised from the perspective of the EU acting as a peace project.
Thank you. So if I understand well, you seem to be quite skeptical about the argument that the EU is advancing, that in a sense, now that the world has changed, you also need to change your stance. And if there are, you know, more hostile nations, then you need to adopt another stance. You're not entirely convinced by that.
Well, I am convinced. I mean, I remember actually the article, one of my articles that is heavily quoted from about 7 years ago is one where I claim that the European Union needs to adopt a geopolitical stance, but not a geopolitical stance in terms of becoming, of viewing the world as a source of threats, but rather engaging pragmatically through dialogue with different actors around the world, not painting the world as a source of either friends or enemies, which is exactly what's happening now, where you're either with the, let's say, good forces in the liberal world order, you're against them. And this goes very much against the whole peace narrative, which focused on persuasion, dialogue, changing the self through engaging with the other, accepting that your norms, your standpoint, the way you view, let's say, the way you understand international relations has to transform when you engage with another actor. Even though you may argue this wasn't really happening even 20 years ago, and there's a lot of criticism about the EU's promotion of norms, but that was, at least in terms of the EU strategy, that was at the core. Now, in terms of what's happening now, much of the shift towards geopolitics has been more discursive than anything. And there are people arguing, well, does the EU actually have the capacity to act as a geopolitical player, even though it recognizes that the world has changed? If you look at the EU's GDP, obviously it's much smaller than countries like Germany, for example. And it still relies on the military capabilities of the nation states, actually a select number of them, of the nation states. So yeah, I'm not skeptical that this is that the European Union can do this, but I'm not sure that framing the world as a source of enemies or friends is particularly the best way for the EU to approach the situation more globally, especially because the EU in the past framed itself as achieving peace through persuasion. So it's a big departure from the previous core narratives in its strategy.
Thank you so much, Christian, for this fascinating lecture. Any more questions before we move to the next speaker?
May I?
Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Baszewska from Democracy Institute of the Central European University. So I do have a question because I'm discussing the same topic, and Christian was discussing peace, and especially I'm interested in his view on how do you think, Christian, Zelensky's approach to Russia, not coming to a conclusion of peace because they are aggressors, fits with the aspirations of the country to become a member state, especially because very often we forget to mention that no country in war can actually become a member state, and that we do need a peace treaty in order to seriously talk about any possible accession in the future of Ukraine to the EU, especially because we need defined borders, a line where we're going to apply the acquis. Even for NATO, we need a territory that will be controlled by Ukraine in order to know how to invoke Article 5. So how do you see this approach, absence basically of any talks on peace treaty with the aspirations of the country, and also of the European Union to accelerate the progress of Ukraine and to make it a member state in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a very tough question because we don't know exactly what Zelensky is thinking or what the political establishment in Ukraine are actually thinking. We just see the proposals that are being put forward. Obviously, one example probably would be the case of Cyprus, where the country is part of the European Union and NATO, but the conflict in some way has been frozen, and neither party is actually happy with the outcome. But in Ukraine, I think, given the fact that the war has raged much more fiercely than in Cyprus, I guess that it will be a bit more difficult to draw this kind of dividing line where part of the country goes into EU, maybe to a lesser extent possible in NATO. But from what I gather, these are some of the plans that the Trump administration has towards Ukraine. So I guess at this point, there's also negotiation probably going on between the Ukrainian side and the American side. And I don't think Zelensky wants to show all of his cards at this point. But I think if there's willingness in the European Union, especially in NATO is a whole different discussion, but in the EU, and I think the Russians may be more willing to allow, I'm not sure that allow is the best word, but to accept that the part of Ukraine will be a member of the European Union. So in this case, I think if there is willingness among the member states, probably there will be also willingness to be creative in terms of speeding up the accession process of Ukraine. And just today, Romania and Bulgaria were admitted to Schengen, and they've been waiting for 15 years. And some people would argue that this happened because in these two countries, you have extreme right-wing populists that are very much, very close to forming governments in both countries. And it's a way for the European Union to shore up support. So when it's faced with these kind of both internal and external challenges, the EU tends to be quite creative and go against some of its regulation or changes regulations in order to deal with them. So maybe in the case of Ukraine or also Moldova, there will be some drive in the future to speed up accession. Actually, the whole decision to give them candidate status, if you compare to the way in which they were perceived 5 years ago, was quite extraordinary at the time. No one could have really predicted that would happen. So I mean, I'm quite optimistic in terms of EU enlargement towards Ukraine and Moldova. We also have a new high representative now, and I think she will make this one of her key priorities.
Thank you so much, Christian. Any more questions? So let's continue with Dr. Diego Varela from Alexandru Lon Cuza University, and he will talk about the enlargement and the geopolitical center of gravity of the European Union. Diego, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, he was the speaker I was mentioning earlier that he hasn't logged in yet, and so Christian.
So no worries, my fault. So let's move to Dr. Elena Bashenka from CEU Democracy Institute. She will speak about the EU enlargement in times of threats, bridging or widening the gap between commitments and reality. Elena, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll just, it's very good that I follow the discussion after Christian, because it is very much related to what he was talking about. And I'm very happy to hear someone who's very optimistic about enlargement, because I'm certainly not. I'm very sorry in advance that I'll be a little bit negative about that, but I do see indeed a huge gap between commitments and reality, and that's on both sides. So on these sides, because it takes two to tango, of course. So it is not just the European Union which constantly promises enlargement to either countries from the Western Balkans or now Eastern European countries. But it is also the countries that are not reforming at all, not well, slowly at least. And it is story of pretense, in my opinion. The candidate countries are pretending that they are reforming. EU is pretending that it is enlarging. So they're all actors in this story. Most unfortunately, this comes in very, very difficult times, of course, and it's not the first time. It is the war in Ukraine that reminded us how fragile peace is in Europe. It happened decades ago with Yugoslavia, and then also EU was very much emphasizing their efforts to integrate the region. However, once the situation calmed down, that has been somewhat forgotten. And as I mentioned as well, the states are also not very much reforming. So it is on both sides that I see a huge gap between commitments and also achievements or reality. What we have at the moment, because we don't have too much time, I'll try to summarize. It's too many countries we have now, so I can't go into detail, but I'll try to summarize what's happening on the ground and why I'm so, well, not very much positive about any possible enlargement soon. First is, well, the greatest problem is, as I said, the pretending on both sides. On this side, no achievements on any of the two sides, so either on the European Union or the candidate countries. But then let's see what the issue is. We do have in the Western Turkey, I'm not going to even go into, because we have the discussions have been halted for quite a long time now, so they've been wiped out almost from the enlargement map. What I wanted to look at today is the Western Balkan countries and the three Eastern European countries, so Georgia, Moldova, and of course Ukraine. So the Western Balkan countries, in the Western Balkan countries, we have quite a lot. And for the first time now, Western Balkan countries do look peaceful when compared, of course, to the other countries. However, the situation is far from great. Well, we do not have any war or other conflict. Well, we do have many minor conflicts, but I'm talking about military conflict. While we do have peace in the Balkans, we do have many issues, including, of course, as Professor Nomikos mentioned at the beginning, systemic corruption we do have in the Western Balkans, and we do have trapped states. So this is a huge problem for the entire region, but we do have other issues as well, and this is exactly why I'm not seeing any enlargement happening very soon at all. So let's start with Albania, for instance. It has been a candidate country since 2014. It only now opened the first cluster. It does have huge issues with corruption, and also for the Western Balkans, the bilateral disputes are a huge problem. And yes, the most well-known ones, the known one probably is now North Macedonia, with Greece having the issue before, or now with Bulgaria. But do believe me that this is not, it might be the most well-known, but it's far from the only problem in the Western Balkan bilateral issue. Just watch and see how many bilateral disputes pop up among other states very soon. So that goes for all states from the Western Balkans, especially legacies from the past, from the wars. So we do have a couple of weeks ago, Croatian actually sending non-paper to Montenegro about bilateral disputes that they want to issue. We do have Serbia with being just blocked a couple of days ago with opening the third cluster by 8 member states. We do have the problem of Kosovo, which is not even candidate country, not being given recognized by 5 member states. Albania potential disputes also with neighboring Greece, and the Bosnia and Herzegovina legacies from the past. That too many issues that these countries have that have been brought into the, or will be actually present into the pre-accession process. So I don't see them moving forward anytime soon. Montenegro is the front runner. It well, now it will probably, after closing chapter, actually meeting the interim benchmarks for chapter 23 and 24, it will probably move slightly faster, but I'm seeing again here a potential dispute with Croatia, especially after the resolution on Srebrenica was adopted by the Parliament of Montenegro. So many bilateral disputes to come, and most unfortunately, these disputes are actually a very good excuse even for the candidate countries not to focus on very vital reforms that they desperately need to do in order to move forward. So there are excuses for both sides, for the European Union and for the candidate countries. The final thing is that they will not move forward because of this, and also because, of course, because of the undone necessary reforms. But let's go to the Eastern Europe, which is even more interesting now, because the Western Balkan countries, it's yesterday's news. But let's go to the Eastern European states and see what's going on there. They moved very fast, and that's why they angered slightly the Western Balkan countries, because they've been queuing for very long now to make any progress in the pre-accession process. So, of course, it is the war in Ukraine that sparked such speediness in the progress of this states, so all of them basically, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Georgia now, well, we do have problems in all of them. Let's start with the less problematic ones, with Georgia and Moldova, I would say. Not that they're less problematic in terms of any possible accession, but when compared to Ukraine, where there is a war. So what we have in Georgia now, we do have government that actually decided to even freeze any possible dialogue with the European Union until 2028. Before that, we had even the European Union, which stalled the accession, any progress with the country, any negotiations with the country half a year ago in response to the foreign agents law. So in Georgia, the situation is blocked, is stuck by the Dream Party, and also by the foreign agents law, and their decision was also as well not to progress any further until 2028. So that's why I don't see any progress here. Moldova, they hardly won the EU accession referendum, which in my opinion was absolutely unnecessary at this time. It's highly divided, hugely divided society. We do have problem now. My Christian before mentioned Cyprus when comparing the situation in Ukraine and Cyprus. I would not compare these two. And he also mentioned that Cyprus had frozen conflict. Well, that's the major and crucial difference between Cyprus and Ukraine. Cyprus had more than a decade, more than 15 years of a frozen conflict when became part of the union, and this is something we do not have in Ukraine. What we do have, a similar situation, I can probably compare more Cyprus with Moldova rather than with Ukraine, because what we have in Moldova is a region under which the country does not have a control, and that's Transnistria. Nobody is mentioning this problem, but it will be a problem once they progress, of course, further with their accession. And then we come to Ukraine. What the EU did for Ukraine, it didn't do for any other country before, and of course the situation is completely different to any other country. So it is the first country that is in war that applied for membership and has been progressing even started negotiating during war. It's of course it's extraordinary situation. The EU reacted fast as it did with the Western Balkans, but even went far beyond what it did for the Western Balkans, because what we didn't see with the Yugoslavia, after Yugoslavia, for instance, we didn't see the temporary directive, protection directive being activated. This is what we have now in the case in Ukraine. Ukrainians are treated as almost as EU citizens. So it is for the first time that we see this directive being activated, and it is a huge thing. Of course, in a blink of an eye, they did get candidate status in like couple of 3 months. They applied in February 2022. Already in June they were candidates, and of course then the opening of the accession negotiations has started. So this is all okay. However, I do see huge issues, which I know everyone's very enthusiastic. I would love to see the entire Europe being part of European Union one day, but I do see many problems when it comes to commitments and reality. So where I see the problem, as I mentioned before, it's of course the war was the main reason for the accelerated progress of this country, but it is at the same time the main obstacle for Ukraine to move very much further, because, as I said, we need borders, or we need defined lines, territory over which Ukraine will have full sovereignty, which will be controlling in order to know where the acquis applies. And the European Union cannot defend the borders of its member states. It relies on its member states and on NATO heavily for the defense of its borders. So in the case of Ukraine, we do need, of course, and even I would go even further, we do need not only peace treaty, but we do need frozen conflict for certain period of time to ensure that this territory, whatever territory it is a territory where over which Ukraine has control. So this is a major obstacle, and I think we should discuss this. I would accept any criticism of my view, but even, as I said, even NATO would need to have in Ukraine certain line. So peace treaty is a must when it comes to Ukraine, in my opinion. And then the second obstacle I see when it comes to Ukraine is the very complex negotiation framework adopted for the country. I mean, it doesn't differ too much when compared to negotiation frameworks for other countries. And we do see here a very different situation. So complying with all requirements when the country is in war is not the same thing as in peaceful times. They do have 6 thematic clusters that consist of 33 chapters, unanimity in the Council